Welcome, everyone. Hello.
Welcome, welcome.
Welcome to another Hump Day. So, as per usual, we'll go through some introductions. But first, if you have any questions or want to get in touch, hashtag HumpDayQandA. You'll find that at the top of the screen. For a minute, let's go through the beginning bit. Let's introduce ourselves, Scott.
I am Scott Stahl. I am a community leader. I've been working with Flutter for a little over 3 years. And also I am organizer of GTK Cleveland, assistant editor of Flutter Community Medium, owner of Flutter Community Slack, blah, 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 blah.
I was going to say, this turns into that kind of like royal sort of thing where you just have like a whole set of names that of things you do, right?
Somebody told me to list it all on my CV one time, and I took one look at that and said no.
My name is Simon Lightfoot, again, another Flutter community lead. I also am CTO at Dev Angels London, a small developer agency here in London. And our Twitter handle's on the screen if you want to get a hold of us. Majid is going to be joining us later, hopefully. Fingers crossed if everything goes well. So we have some guests on today, which we'll be introducing as we go. For the minute, we have a stand-in. Do we have a Randall available at the moment? Let's have a look. I think we have a Randall. Randall, welcome.
Hey, hi, welcome. All right, Randall, thank you.
Randall's going to step in for Majid, but let's go through the do's and don'ts.
Nobody can fill his shoes.
So, Scott, do's and don'ts.
Do's and don'ts. Too long, don't read version.
TLDR.
Be decent to people.
Yes.
Now, the longer version, be respectful, constructive, while on YouTube. In the comments, I know for YouTube comments that can be a stretch, but you can try. Don't post anything that's adult content, rude, offensive statements. Don't troll.
We have no problem.
Don't be an 8-year-old troll. We're not really here for you to advertise your product, your service, whatever. We're not here for you to advertise yourself. So if you're looking for a date, not in our chat, please. Don't spam. The one we see the most, okay, we take your questions and we put them in a spreadsheet. We've also got questions there that we've pulled from spreadsheet from Twitter all week long, okay, for 7 days. If we don't answer your question within a few minutes, that doesn't mean for you to keep posting it over and over and over and over again, especially if you look at the chat and you can see the last time you posted your question. Don't post it again. Really, we're just going to ignore it at that point. Harassment of any kind, bye. Not only will you be gone here, we will check your name in the Flutter community Slack. We have friends that run the Flutter community Discord. They'll look for you there. We'll hunt you down and get rid of you everywhere.
I mean, we don't want anything. I mean, we want it to be a positive community. So giving that, now we've gone for the negative, let's go for the positive. Be nice to people, and yes, we want to hear your questions and your comments and everything else in between.
I would say be excellent to each other, but then we'd get sued for copyright.
So, I have a little surprise. Hang on, let's get rid of these banners. I want to show you. I got this in the post just the other day. A little Flutter hoodie. Oh, Randall, you've got one as well. Yeah, and a lovely little card. Happy New Year.
Mine's late.
Yeah. Three months, but I did see this very nice message.
And socks,
yeah,
don't forget the socks.
As well. Happy New Year. Thank you for all your hard work in 2020 and best of 2021. That's really good.
Very
nice.
cool.
Yeah, some socks as well.
Socks, dash socks. I think they make you run faster. Yeah.
So,
not very punny, Randall.
What is on today's show, Scott?
What is on today's show? We have one very special guest. Now, you might remember from Flutter Engage, Flutter is now running the installer for Ubuntu, and it is also ready and recommended for writing apps on Ubuntu desktop. I said desktop. So
I have to say that there's. I mean, I came from desktop to mobile, and now it feels like I'm going back, which is good, in fact, because Tim Sneath did this package called Win32, which anyone doing Windows can go find. And there's some similar packages out there for all the different platforms. But this one just took me back. And I was like, all these different APIs, I've forgotten about how the messaging system works on Windows and various things. And I think one of the big powers that we still haven't tapped yet is FFI on desktop, which I think is going to be really powerful, and that's going to really open up a huge world of opportunities for those open source native libraries to be brought into your Flutter apps for certain. Shall we? What do you want to introduce the guest, Scott?
Well, I just wanted, just to roll into it. We have Ken VanDine. You might remember him from the Flutter Engage keynote he was on. And lucky for us, he happened to have a little bit of free time and is here today.
Welcome, Ken.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. We're all quite excited, actually. I mean, I have to be honest, I run a Windows environment as my primary. However, I've used Linux for all of my development career.
We'll forgive you.
Do you know what? I used to go quite often to some different sort of London meetups, and there's actually Brian Linuxing, who runs the Linux London meetup. And that's his online name. I've forgotten his last name. It's called Brian Linuxing. And they do a meetup every month, and they're introducing all these latest and greatest things that are happening, and it's always a growing space. So, I mean, what is your experiences of Linux? I mean, what's your background? Do you mind us asking?
Oh my goodness. Well, I've been involved in Linux desktop for well over 20 years now. Long time GNOME developer, been a member of the GNOME community since before 2.0, like 20 years, literally over 20 years. In the past, prior to my days with Ubuntu, I actually created my own distribution of Linux, Foresight Linux, way back in the day. But I've been involved in the desktop for many years. I've been working on the Ubuntu desktop team for the last 12 years, and I currently lead the desktop team. I did take a short stint for a couple years working on the Ubuntu phone, but I came back to desktop. That's really where my heart is.
The Ubuntu phone, that was a web-based system, wasn't it?
No, not web-based. It was QML.
Okay.
For the language, we had our own Ubuntu SDK, which was based on Qt.
Right. Qt, the Qt widgets and all of that sort.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, we are going to talk about some of these different things. I mean, for over the lifetime of Linux, we've had several different iterations of desktop environments, as well as, I mean, obviously the de facto X Windows, right, which has gone the way. Well, it's still, as far as I understand, it's still somewhere in the system, but it's pretty much the way of the dinosaur now, and you don't use X Windows natively with its native set of APIs. I assume Ubuntu Desktop is built on top of that in some fashion. Did Ubuntu Desktop originally use KDE, or did you have an option between KDE and? I'm sorry, it's so long ago.
Yeah, so I can answer that. So we've always been a GNOME-based distro for the default Ubuntu desktop. However, one thing we've encouraged with our
the logo for that was the foot, right? Like the footprint. Was that?
Yes, that's for GNOME. Yes, yep. That's the foot,
okay. I remember back in the day.
However, we have this concept of Ubuntu flavors, which are community-driven, and we have official flavors that are KDE based. There's Lubuntu, which is LXDE. There's XFCE based version. There's a bunch of flavors. Mate is a very popular one. So different desktop environments, and people create their own flavor of Ubuntu that ships with a different desktop environment. But if you go to ubuntu.com and download Ubuntu, what you get is the GNOME-based desktop.
Right. Okay.
Cool.
So how does? I mean, I remember. Well, I say remember, it's on the vague recollections, when the desktop went from almost like the sort of software frame buffer into the kind of hardware compositing layer system. And what was that? The whole thing, we get wiggly windows and fire. Compiz, that's it. Compiz Fusion, that whole thing.
The second time you had to be reminded on that one. Come on, Simon.
It was a long time ago.
Your Windows can wobble.
There was this kind of really big uptick on Ubuntu Desktop. I feel like Ubuntu Desktop, when that kind of system came out, people just wanted to try this. Oh, wow, I can have 3D stuff on my screen and a wiggle. It's very much, I'm not sure how much practical usage it has. I mean, you get that kind of, what was the effect that you had on Mac at the time, which was the zoom down into the icon?
Genie effect.
Genie effect.
Yeah, we had Genie effect.
Add that to your Linux, and it's like,
I particularly like the cube for switching workspaces. It would spin a cube, so you could see the different. So you'd have different workspaces on each side. I really enjoyed that. But yeah, for the most part, it was all novelty. You know, it didn't add add really any value. But it was a lot of fun to work on.
I mean, I know the effects and the shader stuff there probably didn't add that much impact. As you said, it was like more sort of frills. But changing, was that a big change going from software to, was that a sort of big change from going from just software, you had software rendered, you had 2D accelerated, and then you kind of got into the OpenGL 3D desktop at that point. Was that a big change?
Not really. I mean, so those things all often depended on hardware acceleration, even back then. However, they would fall back to software rendering if you didn't have the hardware that supported it. Clearly, it didn't perform as well with software rendering. So ideally, you wanted to have good graphics.
Does Flutter.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, this is software rendering, right? You're essentially telling the CPU to render every pixel. It's not going to perform, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah, absolutely. But the great news is, though, modern hardware, that's really not an issue anymore, right? Even on Linux, we have great support for graphics out of the box. So I'm really not concerned with that at all.
So looking at some of this, I've been around Linux a little bit here and there. I remember when Enlightenment was new. So that was a little while ago. But Flutter on desktop. Wow.
Yeah.
Right.
So some interesting questions here. Is Flutter running on the desktop, or does it have to run in a window? And the reason that I'm asking this is because if we don't need to run it in a window, and where our app, if we draw a graphic and it's going to end at the graphic, then I'm thinking desktop applets type thing?
Yeah, well, that's actually an interesting question. So as I mentioned during the keynote in Engage, one thing that Canonical has committed to doing is contributing multi-window support upstream to Flutter. So we're enabling that for desktop, not just for Linux, right? And we have some folks here at Canonical that has a great deal of experience with window management, display servers, that sort of thing. We did this work for Ubuntu Phone and Convergence in the past. We have some great expertise here. So we've been working with the Flutter team at Google on defining that spec on what multi-window is going to do. But the cool thing about the multi-window work is it's going to give you the ability to have, for example, like a contextual menu that will go over the edge of the screen, right? Because technically under the covers, it will actually be a window type that is displayed and anchored to a specific spot on your screen. Same sort of thing for tooltips and stuff like that, which today would get clipped at the edge of the window. So with that work, we could have applets potentially.
Yeah, I think we spoke to last week. We spoke to some chaps from Microsoft, and they were talking about how they were doing the Surface Duo with the two screens. And of course, the hinge is an area of the screen you can't render to, so they have to make sure that any pop-ups don't overlap the hinge and will either pop up on the right or on the left hand side within the window surface.
Yeah.
So that we've known about that kind of problem. And obviously on a phone device, it's not really a problem. But when your app is only a small portion of the screen, then it becomes a new issue.
Right. So it needs to be able to detect where the edge of the screen is, as well as the edge of the parent window. So therefore, if you're up against the edge of the screen, it will move your pop-up over. So it doesn't go off the screen potentially. I haven't been heavily involved in that design work. It's just I'm leading the team that's doing the work. So
I just realized there's another problem that you get with multiple monitors as well, with multiple DPI resolutions and lots of other fun things to think about. Yeah.
So that's something that Canonical is stepping up to implement. So hopefully everybody will enjoy that.
Cool.
I know we're excited.
So everybody is going to go double check and take a good look at what their favorite Plasma widgets look like.
Yep.
Start recreating them in Flutter.
Yeah, I would love to see the creative stuff people come up with. So that's really what it's all about for me. I mean, what we're excited about with Flutter is really about the application ecosystem, right? We deliver a desktop operating system, but how interesting is that without interesting apps? And we have some interesting apps already. However, it's kind of niche as far as who the application developers are. And people that want to use existing toolkits that are already popular in Linux. And there are some great toolkits that are already popular in Linux. However, if you have this huge ecosystem of apps or app developers that are targeting iOS or Android, why not make it easy for them to bring these great apps to the desktop as well, regardless if it's Windows, Mac, or Linux. That really shouldn't matter very much, right? So we want to open up that ecosystem to allow people to bring their apps everywhere, including Ubuntu. So that's really what it's all about for us.
Very cool.
I'm kind of curious. So we're talking about the installer. So the installer is that your first go-to application to trial run like Flutter on desktop, or is this going to be your sort of de facto open source? Here's how you build something with Flutter.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, so we've had a need to write a new installer for a long time. Our existing installer, Ubiquity, it's a great installer. It's worked really well for a very long time, although the code is very old and it's based on the Debian installer, which is somewhat deprecated upstream as well. So we've kind of had a need to rebuild our installer from scratch for a long time, just for maintenance purposes, right? I mean, this installer is more than 10 years old. And we have a number of other technologies that we've developed since then that's used for, like, cloud and metal as a service, being able to install things very rapidly on, provisioning devices and things like that. So we wanted to leverage some of the other technologies that we've developed in this installer. So it was a great opportunity, since we've just did the work to enable Flutter for Linux. Let's eat our own dog food. And let's build a critical piece of Ubuntu using Flutter as, kind of our own sort of a test case, but as an example to everybody to say, hey, we think this is ready. Why not use it? And like I mentioned in the keynote, which definitely got a bunch of press, is that Flutter is our default choice, right? I would say that that's very much true where it makes sense. I mean, there might be cases where we need to develop something where Flutter doesn't make sense, but that's going to be our first choice. We're going to, if we can do something in Flutter, we're gonna, but it might not target every platform, every device that we're trying to target. But clearly for desktop apps, Flutter is a great choice, and we want to make sure we set that trail.
One of the things that was really fascinating about the Flutter Engage, not only the announcement, of course, that the desktop installer is written in desktop Flutter, but also that y'all there at Canonical are working on the Yugu, I think it's called, widget set.
Yaru.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yes.
See, I can't remember. It's been a week. Okay. The Yaru, widget set. And what's amazing about this is that first, there's interest in doing that, to actually have apps mimic the whole look and feel of the rest of Ubuntu, so that you don't, it's not like sticking its thumb out saying, I am something different. I know that's happened, that can't be happening with, say, the iOS and Android stores, because it can so mimic the sort of native apps that it doesn't see that. And how different is it to use the Yaru widgets? Is it a lot of the same named things and just different style?
Yeah, I can talk to that a little bit. So, Yaru, let me backstep a little bit about the logic here. So one thing that's very important in the Linux ecosystem anyway is themes, right?
Yeah.
People have the ability to download any sort of theme and make their desktop look however they want, which is great. However, like Ubuntu, we have our own look and feel, our own style that we take a lot of pride in. There's actually this is actually not a Canonical effort. Within Ubuntu, it's all about open source and community. And there's a Yaru team out there in the community that maintains the Yaru theme for the desktop outside of Flutter. So they've gone through and they've adapted the Adwaita theme, which is the default GNOME theme, and added the Yaru style, which is colors and hints and sizes and things and stuff. So we thought it would be fun to do the same thing for Flutter apps. Now the difference is a little bit, so with a theme is a GTK theme on the desktop, if you change your theme, suddenly all your apps that are GTK based will honor that theme. The app developer doesn't have to do anything special to make that work. So with Flutter, you actually do need to, as an app developer, say, I want my app to look like this. And that's absolutely fine. We understand that sort of mentality, but we still wanted to enable that, especially for our own apps that we develop. We want it to look Ubuntu, and we don't want to do that look and feel work in our app. We want to be able to just say, import Yaru, make it a Yaru app, which is based on Material. Actually, it's still a Material app. It just sets the theme. So one thing we're trying to do with that is we're trying to stick as closely as we can to Material, and just change some styling, like colors, what fonts are used, because we don't want to run into issues with like layout and sizes of widgets. I think that could be make it trickier for app developers.
I'm going to bring up, I think I've just found these online. This is what we're talking about, the installer, right? So you're working this theme with like the style of buttons and the fonts and that kind of thing.
So what version does this start in?
What, the installer?
Yeah.
Okay.
This isn't in 2004, is it?
No,
LTS?
no. That LTS is already shipped out the door. So for those that might not be familiar with Ubuntu's release process, our releases are based on year and month. So we release every 6 months. So 2104, we're about to release in April. That's April of 2021. 2110, we will release in October. Yeah, I know, right? I know. So 2110 is this October. Now, one important milestone for us is every 2 years, we ship a version that's called LTS, long-term supported. They get extended support. So we want to make sure that the new installer is done and ready and high enough quality that we can ship it in 2204. So that is April of 2022. In order to do that, though, we really need to use the installer, at least to be able to have users test it in a release prior to that. So our goal is to have as many features as we can have in an alternative downloadable ISO for 2110, and encourage people to test that. And we're hoping to have a basic install experience where you can do like a guided install, blast your whole disk kind of thing, much sooner than that.
You just reminded me of a little controversial thing I read, that the latest version of the Linux kernel broke swap, and just decimated some people's hard drives.
I actually didn't hear about this. How could I have missed this?
Okay, so Linux Toolbox literally said don't use this, and they renamed the version to don't use at the end, because basically the handling of where it write instead of the swap partition. It's only if you have a swap partition set up. So I think Ubuntu uses swap files.
Yes, we do now.
So Ubuntu is not affected. Yay! But other Linux distros may apply. So when they have the swap partition, it just decides to write the sectors all across the hard drive because it gets the map wrong. So you can imagine people were very unhappy. And they're like, "Don't use this. This is not a released version." But these things happen in software, right? I mean, especially if you're working on bleeding edge, and this is where I guess the difference between one of these sort of LTS releases is versus and
our interim releases, releases like what we're about to do in April and October. This is where we push things to the edge. We ship much newer versions of things, and then that last release cycle before the LTS, we try to stabilize. We don't try to push new versions of things as much. Just push fixes, improvements, stabilizing, that sort of thing. So right now is the time to kind of blaze these trails. So that's why we're working on the installer right now.
If you have any, if you want any of our viewers to test anything, please reach out to us with any links, and we'll make sure we tweet that out on our Flutter community stuff, so we can get you some needed feedback from the Flutter community on any of those.
Maybe I can join Humpday again.
Yeah, no, anytime. Yeah.
Yeah, the installer is pretty much done. You're shipping that with code you want people to run.
It's not done yet. We're still active development.
Oh, okay. Do you have a roadmap of what other system utilities and core user apps that you're thinking about rewriting in Flutter?
Not yet. Not yet. I'm sure as we do tackle additional projects, we will look to develop them in Flutter. But really what I'm hoping to do is kind of inspire the community to develop really cool apps. Right. After the announcement last summer with Linux support hitting master, we had an influx of Flutter-based apps that people created and published into our Snap Store, which was great to see. And I want to try to, now that we're saying that this is really ready for prime time, let's take that up a notch and get more people to contribute those sorts of things.
So the installer obviously has to reach out to a lot of low-level stuff that probably isn't stuff that I'm already finding in Pub. Do you have to write a lot of channel code to do that?
Actually, not really. So we're leveraging some existing technologies that we've developed as the backend. So we're just talking to this stuff over a REST API. So we have other services on the machine that can handle writing the disk partitions and those sorts of things out, and we're just communicating there. So we're creating. It's called Subiquity. Is it's the server installer for Ubuntu.
Okay.
So we're leveraging that. So Subiquity is providing APIs that we can drive from the desktop app.
That makes it quite simpler, especially because I think Flutter's pretty well got REST APIs down. So that, I think we're good on that.
So the other interesting thing, because Linux uses a virtual file system with files being the access points, you can reopen up files and manipulate files. So as long as you can do I/O controls, then you could essentially do driver, direct access and various other magical things. So I mean, I know that it's a slight side point, but I know dbus has been now there's a package called dbus, which I'll bring up on the screen here.
Yeah, we created that.
Cool.
And that allows you to access all the dbus and resources and various other things that are accessible on the device.
Wow.
Yeah, so for people that might not be familiar with Linux desktop development, dbus is an IPC mechanism. It's standard across all Linux desktops. So almost anything you might interact with in a user session, like notifications, even talking to a network manager to bring up and down Wi-Fi and stuff like that, all kinds of stuff is available via dbus. So we started out by creating a dbus package that then anybody could wrap that to talk to others, to talk to dbus. Like we have a Bluesy one, which is Bluetooth. So now like you can have the, I think it's called Flutter Blue. Can use a Linux platform interface that talks to Bluesy, which talks to the dbus package to control Bluetooth pairing and all that.
We've had a member of the community, JP. He's actually JP Nurum. He's actually been working on the Plus packages. So this is a set we've got battery and stuff like that, and he uses the dbus to look at the battery state of the device to see if it has a battery and what the charge level is and things like this. Right. To give that to a Flutter application. So
right. I was thrilled to see that. I love the Plus packages, and so that's actually one thing I wanted to mention is one of the things that I think yes, we're writing the installer in Flutter right now, but as I consider us app developer enablers, right? I want us to focus our efforts as much as we can to enable app developers to create really cool stuff. So we're going to put some more effort into plugins and packages, things like that could be more generally useful. And there are limitations today, right, in what plugins are available for desktop in general. So I see us as helping bridge that gap. We're going to try to contribute in those spaces to make these things available. And yeah, as you can see in this list of packages, that's what we've been kind of focusing on, as well as we're doing engine work, right, to bring things up to speed to where they need to be for the Linux desktop.
I was just thinking, actually, the one thing I feel like I'm criticizing. It's not criticizing. You need to get an officially signed publisher on pub.dev so you can identify what packages there are. Yes,
we've been talking about that. We have an internal process within Canonical where we'll create like a general signer kind of thing, and then we'll have to put in requests with our IS department to publish releases. We've been working on stabilize, kind of coming up with a process around that. We're still learning our way around the Flutter community as well. So we appreciate the feedback. We do know about that already, but there's probably plenty of things we don't know. And we're trying to learn along the way how we can be.
My first suggestion on a package, I think the community can agree, and that is audio. There needs to be ALSA or whatever, some way of communicating without everyone re-implementing their own. And I think that's kind of one of those enabling features that would really excel the desktop space.
Audio, video, WebView, Firebase.
These are all difficult propositions. These aren't simple.
They are. We currently have plans to do some work on the bringing Firebase support via Flutterfire. So we're going to be contributing to that as well.
There's actually been some work by community members on porting Flutter to Dart, and also using. There's also been some previous work with using the Firebase C++ interface. as a way of bringing Flutter to Firebase to Flutter desktop. So
yeah, I think the route we're going to go is we're going to do some work on the Dart implementation.
Well, yeah, there's plenty of stuff going on. I think we should open up the floor to some questions.
Sure.
From
I would just noticed one that's good to start with. Somebody was asking, how can I get involved? And also, what's the preferred channel of communication?
Yes. We use Discourse for Ubuntu. This is a great way to get involved with the Ubuntu community. And we're actually kind of rebuilding our community team right now, which I am also leading. So we can expect some developments there, but we're going to try to channel as much of our efforts as far as, bringing the community together via Discourse. But people can look for the desktop category on Discourse, ask questions. There's been a couple community members that have actually been assembling all the bits of Flutter for Linux news and tidbits that they've been able to scrape from around the web and putting it together in a master Discourse post. This is all we know about what's going on, which included a bunch of the things that I talked about during the keynote last week. But there's community members that are getting excited there about what we're doing with Flutter. And I want to kind of nourish that as much as I can. I really want to bring everybody together just to create really cool stuff.
Let's see.
So, I want to just reiterate, if anyone has any questions, please use the hashtag above, and please use it in the live chat. And if we don't get to it now, we'll try and get to your questions. Specifically, if there's any questions around Linux at the moment, because I'm sure we'll get all sorts of random questions.
Uh-oh.
I'm
Dead
not
air.
quite sure.
I just said dead air. Go.
Oh yeah, no, I'm Ken, you were talking about GTK?
Well, yeah. So I saw there was a question related to the reason for embedding Flutter inside GTK and our plans with GTK. So let me talk to that a little bit. So GTK, we are still using GTK. It's kind of the toolkit that you can expect to be available absolutely anywhere you're running a Linux desktop, right? It's stable, it's reliable. Much of what you see on the desktop is built with GTK today, including the shell that you use for your desktop environment. So GTK is not going anywhere. And I'm not concerned with that in any way. And we still participate very much in the GTK community and the GNOME communities. For Flutter being embedded in a GTK window, it really wasn't about GTK. It was really about the availability of GTK everywhere, right? We needed a place to embed the Flutter app. It needed to be some sort of a window. GTK gives you out-of-the-box channels to deal with accessibility, and a number of things, input methods, all those sorts of things. Those are already available today via GTK. So we were able to wire up the embedded Flutter, the Flutter embedder, to what GTK provides there. So we've done accessibility support now, so Flutter desktop apps can be fully accessible when running on Linux, using the native built-in accessibility infrastructure provided by the Linux desktop. So that's kind of why we chose GTK there. There was other possible choices, but GTK is something you can expect to be available anywhere. So there's no limitation as far as choosing GTK there. But it added some functionality that we could get easily without having to rebuild it all from scratch. If we just built like just a Wayland window from scratch or X, then we'd have to put a bunch of extra work into kind of developing that. So let's leverage what GTK can provide, because GTK is there and it's widely available. And as far as the Wayland question, so actually for somebody asked about is there a plan to drop GTK and use Wayland directly in the future? I would say no. I don't see any reason for like dropping. I mean, really, GTK has native Wayland support built in. We get that kind of for free, so why not harness that? We definitely do support Wayland. In fact, 2104, which will be released next month, Wayland will be our default session. And that's been kind of a contentious thing. We've tried to do this in the past, but there were a lot of things that didn't work yet in Wayland. But we feel like that gap is getting much narrower. And in order to really get us to the point where we need to be for our next LTS release, 2204, we need to ship it for a couple of cycles in Ubuntu prior to that to really finish filling those gaps. Until we're shipping it by default, people aren't going to put the effort they need into working on the issues that need to be resolved. Wayland is very close, I feel, and it's the future. It's where we need to be. So our goal is to make it top notch in time for 2204, our Wayland support. And Flutter apps should work perfectly fine today in Wayland.
So we have a question here from the audience. #HumpDayQandA. Would it be possible to create a Flutter app that can take in files that the user drags and drops into the app?
I don't see why not. I mean, it's a simple matter of programming, right? I mean,
simple, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it would definitely be work. And I'm sure today, at least, it would require some C++ code.
So you need a plugin, and you'd need to do method channels and do all that sort of communication. But in theory goes, you should be able to let drag and drop.
Yes. And actually, so in many ways, so it really kind of depends what you're looking for. If you're talking about creating like a file manager app in Flutter, that's one thing. But the more common use case for dragging and dropping stuff is like, say you drag a PDF file onto an app that can open a PDF file, right? Really what that does under the covers on a Linux desktop is it runs the command for the program you dropped it into with the file that you're dropping into it as an argument. That would actually work today.
And then you can use IP, right? And then that would start a new instance. You could then use IPC to dispatch that to the currently running application.
Yes, and that should work seamlessly now. Just over the last couple months, they've landed the desktop Flutter now takes command line arguments. So that should work seamlessly. You should be able to pretty easily implement something that does that. A full file manager, that requires a fair bit more overhead. But it's a simple matter of programming.
I wonder if I think the sort of drag and drop is quite an easy sort of, as you said, like because it starts just a bit of startup logic to like kind of not restart the application, but to deploy that string to the currently running instance is one little piece of work that could quite easily be done. There's also another type of work, which is if you're dragging and then you want to like a display within Flutter of where you're dropping that sort of thing, then that's like maybe a slightly different proposition because you haven't dropped it yet. So yeah, we'll see. Again, please, I'm gonna butcher your name, but please, if you feel like you want to do this, make a package for it, right?
I butchered Ken's earlier, I think. So join the club.
I forgive you.
Join the club. Here's an interesting one.
Sorry, I was bringing one up.
No.
I was going to say that just to follow up. It's just I think this is Solid Dose. So this is Robert Felker. He said,
Robert, come into the stream, Robert.
Yeah.
You know how. I sent you a link.
There's a rich copy and paste feature that's actually being worked on. So that also might be applicable in that sort of situation as well. Yeah. Sorry, Karen. Do you have another question, Scott, from the audience? Or should I pick another one?
Yeah, actually, let me flip over here to where I can reach it. There was an interesting point made. Audio. And I'd like to add to that, not just audio, but maybe, I don't know, this thing.
Camera.
The camera. How are we going now? Again, Flutter is designed to be a UI toolkit. It's not an operating system, so it doesn't have direct access to the hardware, of course. With all of the different types of cameras and such, and how is this going to work? I mean, is there one central call to make and then the OS handles it all, or?
Yeah, so on Linux, there is a common API for accessing those sorts of things. It would just be it would be some work to do to create a Linux platform interface for a plugin. I assume there's a common plugin for accessing the camera on Android or iOS, right? I'm not familiar with developing on Android or iOS, obviously, but I imagine there's something out there today that works on those platforms.
Yeah.
What I would be most interested in is the Linux platform interface for that same plugin, so the same code can run on Linux desktop.
I think audio is one of the areas that Flutter has really struggled with overall, and there's several different audio players that play like a track or a piece of musical play. There's a difference between playing that and a sound effect on a click, scheduling. There's a lot of areas to be worked on, but there's no official audio solution from the Flutter team. So like we have a video player, and we have I think the video player plugin also has the media recorder stuff in it. You can implement that with Linux, of course, as an extension, but there is no official audio package. So I think there's room for the community to come together to try and come up with one solution that fits all.
Yeah,
which would make sense.
Yeah,
I'm gonna pick out another question here. It's just a general one here. Well, this is following up on that one. That's
basically, yeah.
No, it wasn't that one. Sorry. Are there any gossips for new Flutter-based desktop environment for Ubuntu to replace?
Now, I also did ask Adrian if he wants to start some. So if there isn't any, Adrian, maybe you can make that happen.
I mean, it's kind of interesting, right? So there's no reason, and I think I spoke about this with some of the members of the community before, but from an operating system perspective, the desktop environment is just a running application itself. It's embedded as part of the operating system, but it is just an application. So when your system starts up, it runs their init process, and that boots up everything else. Mm-hmm. So there's no reason why you couldn't just make your own desktop environment, but then you would be the one that's communicating with GTK to put GTK windows in Flutter, and that's a completely different proposition at that point. But if you wanted just Flutter apps and just Flutter, then there might be an easier path there. So
yeah, so once we have multi-window support, I mean, it's all technically doable. As somebody who has been involved in creating an entire desktop shell from scratch in the past, it's hard.
Yeah.
There is a lot of things that you need to consider, and it's going to require a significant team. But like I said, I mean, it's totally doable, and especially once we have multi-window support, there's, technology-wise, there aren't limitations. It's just, is it worth the effort?
Right. Now, Ken, I understand, I don't want to get you in trouble, but I don't know how you're doing on time.
I actually have a little bit more flexibility than originally planned. So I had something scheduled in 10 minutes, but that got pushed back. So I can stay a little longer.
Great. You just let us know when.
So there is some questions that we had from last week, some general Flutter questions we can answer, and maybe we should bring in one of our other guests, Mariano. Mariano, you want to join us? Hey
everyone.
Oh, and another one on the Linux front while Simon's trying to dig up some of those questions. Ken, supposing that I was doing something with multi-window support on the desktop, as we discussed.
Mm-hmm.
I make a transparent background. So let's say I want to try to do something windowless, and I want there to be a transparent background so that when I draw a custom shape, say using a custom painter, I want to be able to see through that section to the desktop.
You're thinking applets again, aren't you?
Well, not really so much that, as also there are installers that do this.
Mm-hmm.
When you run the installer, it'll show a graphic and it'll be an odd shape or something like that, and you can see through to the desktop.
Like a splash screen for an app. Like you might have
a
non-rectangular window.
So I think technically that should be doable. I mean, that's not even necessarily a multi-window feature, really. It's just, so right now when you create the Linux build for your app, right, with Flutter Create, you get a little template of C++ code that sets up the GTK window and things. So you can set some properties on that GTK window in that C++ code. And there might even be a plugin that does this for you from Dart.
But from I'm not sure about that, but definitely from the Flutter Embedder side, the API for Flutter Embedder allows for transparent windows. So you would essentially still have a rectangular area of the screen, but then the you don't have any border, right? So you can actually have it blur off into the background or have any shape you want. It's not, or it's not a limitation from the Flutter side. But then obviously you would have to, as Ken was just saying, you would have to make that the bit of native C++ code to call the right APIs for GNOME Desktop to enable that feature.
Right. See, and also, as Tim Sneath has said many times, Flutter is about never having to tell your designer no. So the ability to write that into your app, to write a borderless app that also has transparency through to the desktop wherever you want to put it, just watch designers go crazy having fun with that.
I was actually working on something similar. I just realized that that's another interesting point. Multi-window would solve that. The kind of system tray, well, I call system tray from Windows, but the icons next to your on your sort of navigation bar in your operating system, you have like the icon, you tap and you get like a drop down menu appear, and it kind of nicely animates out, and then you've got some options. You tap one of those, you get more options. Obviously, that's really the multi-window would kind of solve being able to do that in the actual menus themselves.
Actually, you could do that even easier. So we could very easily, that's all available via dbus in what the host OS provides. So you could very easily have, we call those app indicators, and there's an API for that. We could very easily create an app indicator package that lets you set the icon, the title, what the menu items are, and what the actions is when you click on those. So that's totally doable, especially since we have the dbus package.
There's a really interesting area of Flutter development, which is tooling, right? So sort of Dart and Flutter being able to do this sort of CLI based tools, or in fact some of the new ones are visual tools. So there's a FVM Flutter version manager, which is primarily a CLI tool. I think he's been working on UI. I don't know if it's been released yet, but in those situations, it really helps to be able to build our own tooling to kind of improve our development environment, and that's something that we can really quickly iterate on with Flutter. So it's quite a powerful proposition to be able to have that access to dbus. I have a question here from the audience. Is there a way for us to make Flutter apps which can be shipped to Ubuntu or actually in any Linux store in the near future? It may and maybe can we give the Linux build release, put it in the snap package? I'm not sure the details there. I mean, I did actually have this thing like, oh, great, I can press build and I can make it executable. How does that process go from that point to actually get into other users' hands?
Yeah, so we have, and for people who might not be familiar with it, a packaging format called snaps, which is kind of a distro agnostic way to distribute your packages. You can think of the Snap Store as like the Play Store, or...
Can I ask a quick question in relation? Is that snaps? Are they like containers? Are they?
Yeah, they're sandboxed apps. They're not actually running a container, but they contain. Yeah, they contain. Yes, exactly. C group stuff. So they're isolated from other things on your system. You can control what the app has access to. So there's a lot of security stuff built into it. But you could any Linux distro that supports snaps, which I think there's 40-ish of them or so. Last I heard, there's probably a lot more now that support snaps easily. So if you go to the Snap Store and install anything that's in the Snap Store, it will just work on any of those distros. So there's a tutorial actually on Flutter Dev on how to package your Flutter app as a snap. And we've created tooling in Snapcraft, which is the tool we use for building snaps. So we've added some convenience features in Snapcraft so it knows how to do things for a Flutter app. So it knows to look for the binary bundles, what to do with it, what libraries to include, that kind of thing. So it generates a snap that's published in the store that anybody can install that will just work.
I'm kind of curious. I'm gonna reach out and follow-up question from that myself. So something that I saw floating around the interwebs during this last week was talking about how that these can get quite large because you're essentially deploying everything inside your snap. Yeah. And I do wonder if there's room for libflutter to be part of the distro, part of the standard package distribution, and version that with every release, and have that part of the standard sort of app update routine. And then each application can depend on their version of that version.
Right. So yeah, let me talk to that a little bit. So yes, as a Linux distro guy, that is the common way that we've done this in the past, right? We've had versioned libs that your app can depend on. However, in talking to the Flutter team at Google, they're actually quite opposed to that sort of idea. They really think it's, and I think I agree with this actually. The Flutter you're building your app with is very important. So as an app developer, Flutter is very fluid. You can be on a very different revision tomorrow than you were today doing your development, right? So then if you were depending on a version of libflutter that was in the store somewhere, or the Ubuntu archive, that latest version that you have today might not be compatible, right? So it's safest to bundle that library with your app. And actually that library itself isn't all that big. If it was to include all the dependencies, it would be. Now, one thing we've done in the Snap world to alleviate this a little bit, to reduce some of the redundancies, is we've got this concept of content snaps. So we have a desktop-based content snap that provides all the common libraries that a desktop app needs.
So this is like a layering operating system thing with the containers. Gotcha.
Yes. So it provides, so you just specify the version of that you want. And it provides the most common things. And the only things you need to provide to bundle in your snap are the things you might need that aren't included in that. But it should solve the case for 99% of folks, right? So then your snap gets to be much, much smaller. And you're, you don't have the same library installed in your system 50 times, right?
I mean, it's always been, there's kind of been that kind of almost industrial industry sort of shift to everyone deploys with everything built in, especially on mobile. And because of the nature of having the sandbox environment, which is obviously great for security, but also not great when it comes to saving on disk space and saving on the whole sort of install process. So I commend you. That's really great a way of solving that problem. Yeah.
Nice. Well, we have one more person to add to the stream here. Any of you in Flutter who have used Solid Awesome Flutter would know this gentleman right here. And if you have been looking at his picture on GitHub, I swear to you, this is the same guy. He just has a little more.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
I'm so happy to be there. I mean, the subject today is really, really interesting. I mean, just for the next year in Flutter, I'm going to work a lot on desktop. So thank you, Ken, for your decision. It's very, very good.
I love hearing that.
Yeah, on my side, one of my friends that I pushed it to Flutter already did the biometric authentication in Linux for Flutter. So it's available. He pushed it, I think, 2 days ago. So.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yep.
And speaking of clear backgrounds on Flutter apps, Robert does the most amazing art in Flutter. Imagine if you can do it with clear backgrounds.
But now I'm moving this kind of knowledge to desktop, and that's why I'm starting working on a file system explorer.
Mm-hmm.
And,
you have a challenge.
and I'm trying to recreate the file system, the rows that grow with the directories exploration.
Oh, nice animations. You mean like?
Yeah, and I got some really, really interesting with it. So I think we can get something, with the quality of Daisy Disk, but for every desktop platform. And I think that's going to be really, really huge. That's the kind of stuff that having Ubuntu now opens to us developer.
Well, if you need any help there, if you have questions, let me know. Reach out, and I have some resources I can provide to you.
Thank you.
The word says bonsoir.
Bonsoir Navarra, French. I got one question.
Different.
Can I go?
Yeah. All yours. The floor is yours.
Yeah. I'm really interesting. I've been a long-term Linux user, but it's quite difficult because to have quality apps, you also need economics. And my question is, if some Flutter developers decide to engage with Linux, do you think we can open a new economy like we can have with iOS or Android?
Yeah, somebody to support it ourselves.
Yeah.
That is.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting question. It's been I've seen a very interesting kind of paradigm shift in, in the past, people used to think about purchasing software, right, or selling your app to a user. But now we're seeing this trend in app purchases, right? And I think that's been quite successful in the mobile space. I would love to see if that could be equally as successful in desktop apps. I really don't know. We do have plans to offer in the Snap Store the ability to sell your apps at some point. We don't know exactly when that's going to happen. Frankly, it's been something we've wanted to do for a long time, but there hasn't been a lot of demand. I think because people are more interested in-app purchases rather than selling their app. I don't think we've had a lot of demand.
Do you think there's also a sort of that the nature of just open source itself and the sort of prospect of this, the kind of users Linux gets, that they kind of
and well, in-app purchases also seems like it doesn't violate the feeling that the software should be free. But at the same time, it's like, okay, fine, I'll give you the base functionality for free. I do believe in that. But if you want the really shiny stuff that took me a lot of extra time to make, please help buy my groceries.
But
right.
What was that phrase that was it Richard Stallman used? Like, was it free as in free beer? No. What was it? The notion of it's open source, but it's not free, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Free as in speech, not free as in beer.
That's the one. Yeah. So I think there's that kind of aspect of, and it's a hard one to break when, as developers, we build software. And it's like you can see something. I'll be honest with you, I've had this myself. I'm like, I see something, I'm like, I'm not paying for that because I can build that, right? There's not. You know what I mean? Like I could go script something that does that with these other libraries or this other thing, and it's like, why should I pay for that, right?
I will say, in my younger years, I kind of felt that same way.
I'm not there anymore. I haven't got time for that.
Exactly, I don't have time for that now. So, as a mobile user, I am very happy to pay for add-ons or or ad-free versions. Like I don't complain about having an ad in my app, right? If I'm using an app on my Android phone, I don't care if there's an ad being displayed, but I will, if I like the app, I'm happy to pay $1.99 or whatever it is to disable ads and get an ad-free version of it, especially because it's supporting that developer, right? So I think there's definitely there are plenty of users out there like me that would be willing to pay for those sorts of things. I think there is the sort of the Linux kind of geek niche that will be averse to that, paying for those sorts of apps. But I think that's a small group of people, right?
I think there's always been that. I think it's kind of evolves from mobile again in terms of the freemium model, right? As you said, like in-app purchases. I think a lot of people get the base thing for free and they get it with ads or they get it with other or something else involved, or they don't get unlock all the features, and then they pay to get the full experience. So it's kind of almost that kind of shareware model of you get the first bit for free and then you have to pay for the follow-up discs with all the lovely game content on.
Yeah, I would say since Apple introduced the whole concept of actually paying for games and apps from your phone, because I've been on a Symbian user for I think since 2006 or so, and no one paid for software. Everyone downloaded the cracked version with the patches and all the stuff. No one paid because you didn't have an easy way to even pay for it, or even to discover. It was easier to discover the patch version than the actual original website with the software for your Symbian Nokia device.
Yeah, or you had to find, like in the even older days of the PC, you had to find a store that sold a box version of the software you wanted.
It's true. It's true. Yeah, it's true.
We actually had. This is going off topic here. We used to have computer fairs. Used to go to here where literally people to set up that tables and just sell lots of like computer hardware, and also you just have tons of CDs strewn everywhere of all sorts of software that everyone wanted. It's brilliant. Sorry, shut up. Anyway, so let's have another question from the audience here. We've got hashtag HumpDayQandA. Can we debug a Flutter Ubuntu app in a VM whilst coding on the other host OS? So let's say, I'm assuming he means like have a Windows operating system and then have a Flutter Ubuntu virtual machine running. Well, I'm going to just hit this up with my first response, and that is there's no reason why you can't. I mean, the way the debug works is and hot reload and hot restart is over a local network interface. However, you would have to probably script it manually with the Flutter attach, I believe it is. So you can attach an IP and port and attach your local instance to the remote or vice versa. Try it. Tell us. Let us know.
Yeah, and I haven't tried this myself, but Windows Subsystem for Linux, WSL2. I think you could actually build Flutter apps in Linux in WSL running on Windows, and it should just work. But I haven't tried it. I'd love to hear feedback if that works.
I will tweet.
Well, my understanding of the question is that your IDE is on Windows, and you're developing a Linux app. But then my question is, but why? Because you could put your IDE on the Linux VM, and then that way you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, and the other thing to mention here, and then what we don't have a problem with, which has always been a sore issue, and that is you can't do. It's very difficult to do VMs inside VMs and work all that kind of thing, right? So you can't exactly. With Android, you can never develop Android with an Android emulator inside of a virtual machine, let's say running Linux. It was just even if you could get it working, it's just so slow, it's just unreasonable. So because you're running a desktop app, it's directly on the operating system that you're emulating, so you don't have those delays and problems. So I want to open up the floor to general Flutter questions, and we have some from last week. We're gonna get to and we'll have all the lovely people here to answer your questions. Yes. Ken, if you need to head off, please just let us know, and we'll make our goodbyes. I don't want to hold you up here.
Yeah, I think I'll take this opportunity to thank you all for having me. It was a joy, and I'd love to come back.
Welcome back anytime.
Please do. Yeah.
Anytime. And especially as we all get more experience with writing Flutter apps for Linux, there are going to be a lot more questions.
I'm sure
that's good, because the more questions, the better all this can be, and keep everything marching forward, and we can come up with new ideas for fun stuff.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Thank you all.
Bye, Ken.
Bye, Ken.
Bye, Ken.
So we have some questions from last week, and again, please ask your questions in the chat, and it can be any general Flutter questions. We have experts among us, so I'm sure we'll find some answers somewhere for you. So questions. So we had a question. We'll see if we can bring some of these up in chat. Guess what? I think we answered that one. Will Flutter compile in debug mode with hot reload through Wi-Fi? Yes. I guess Android, you do enable ADB Wi-Fi. I think we spoke about that before. Any thoughts on if we'll see hot reload for web? Anyone want to?
It's kind of already there, and in fact, I have found that when I was using hot reload and hot restart for web, sometimes it got a little wonky, and then I realized, hit Control-S for save, click on your web browser, hit F5, done.
Or Command R if you're a Mac.
There was a Flutter Engage talk on converting a app from mobile to web. I forget the pair's name that was doing that. But one of the things they were talking about was that hot reload issue. And I also asked that question yesterday of Chris, and he says that it's already doing some parts of it. It might eventually save state as well. It is saving the page position. It's not saving state. And, if React Native can do it, clearly Flutter can do it eventually. So that just had
if you're using Android Studio and you hit the run for the Chrome OS, Chrome web, you may have some issues with the hot reload. Sometimes when you hit the Command S or just the save, it doesn't do it. But if you open from the Flutter Run web on the terminal normally, if you hit the R, it's going to refresh. Normally works. If not, even so, it's so fast that when you refresh the site, you get there. And because you have the / or the paths, different dip linkings, you can just straight up put in the URL that you want to go and just go there and don't go through the whole flow. That's one of the benefits, if you want to call it, from the web. You can straight up dip link in whatever you want.
All right, you got one more that's rather interesting. We could have a lot of fun with this. Simon, you and I were looking at doing servers and gRPC and basically making Dart take over the world. So can we use Dart for backend? Can we use Dart for everything? In fact, we could drop our backend Dart into a Docker container, work on everything, and then just throw the container up into Google Cloud Platform, couldn't we?
Yeah, I mean, there's no limitation as such. I mean, the key here is that when you compile your Dart code, you're compiling to a standard executable file, and you're deploying that executable file to your server, and you're running it like any app. The difference here is that Dart is going to be hosting the web server, right? So you basically inside your Dart backend, you want to start up a HTTP web server, and then that will be listing on a certain port, and then that will then serve off any API requests or website files. There's actually a piece of software made, there's a package made called Shelf, SHELF, Shelf. And Shelf is a web server software, and it has several extensions, virtual directory, static file serving, and all these are available. It's made by the members of the Dart team. So yeah, go ahead, use them. And there's actually a router as well.
But be careful.
Yeah.
Because I think it's for the first time, you can just use Dart with a function as a service. So you have all the network code and the charge, the cold start time that rely on real backend for the cloud technology. And you have your logic just using Dart. If you start with a Dart server and you have too much connection, currently Dart cannot compete with much more, let's say, mature solution. So be careful with that.
I can't remember right now, but was it any plans for Firebase to make functions writing on Dart?
Yeah, there is.
Okay, but it's not in the website writer.
It's not the same. If you use a function for Firebase, you are in the case of fast. So the code behind, it's still C++ or Java or the Google Cloud technology that hold the connection. And you only hold the logic with Dart code, which is really, really effective.
Yep. So you avoid doing the stuff in Node.js, that ugly thing.
You get my point. Yeah, you get my point. If you start Node.js again, that's very difficult when you need to handle the network stuff.
So, Scott, do you have another question from?
Actually, I'm looking at the spreadsheet right now.
So I have a question here.
Let's see here.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Do you want to read it off, Scott? I'll let you read it off.
Does it make any difference to use package as a dependency or import as a module? For example, app size or other factors. So tired of implementing the base project in every new project.
I'm not sure it would impact your program at all if you don't import something.
Well,
so you can add whatever you want in Pubspec YAML, but if you don't actually include it with an import, then it doesn't matter.
I'm wondering. I'm a little bit unclear on the question, but what I am thinking maybe is they don't want to import the entire package just to use part of it.
But that's handled by a tree shaking.
That and also the way you import it, yes.
Yeah. You could say show this or hide that or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, the guys on Very Good Ventures released the Very Good Start. So if you are tired of doing everything the same, just hit the Very Good Start with a new project, and they will give you flavors. It will give you all of the setups which are boring to do over and over again. You just hit the command with the CLI, and that's it. You're good to go.
Mm-hmm. They should. I'm thinking that they should have called it Very Good Bootstrap.
Mm-hmm.
Boom.
Bootstrap might be copyright from the Bootstrap library.
For the Bootstrap, yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of like be excellent to each other. Okay, so next, let's see. do we know what about the primary critical Flutter plugins like Camera? Okay, will they be available for all platforms? I always struggle with the plugin support. I anticipate that the desktop plugins might be a bit different. So just like sometimes the web plugins are different. So we may end up with plugins that are some for web, some for mobile, and some for desktop, or maybe not. Again, as was mentioned earlier, tree shaking is a wonderful thing. You can import this great big fat package that will do all kinds of things, including stuff you don't need, but it doesn't end up in your app when you compile.
Yeah, I think the Flutter team will try to make it into one, because if you think about when they released Flutter Web at the beginning, you have to have the project on a separate project, because even the same kind of libraries were Flutter Web / material. You didn't have like Flutter material or something like that. And now there's like everything is combined. And you have all the platform checks, check if it's Mac OS, check if it's Fuchsia, check if KS Web to check if it's web. You also can check in the imports and just use one or the other, depending on which platform you're using. So I'm pretty sure that things like image pickers and all the stuff will start like popping up more for web, desktop, and all the stuff. To be honest, like the majority of the people, I'm pretty sure they only use it for mobile. So the more people they use it on web, the more people they use it on desktop, the faster they will land on those platforms as well. So if everyone is interested, just put their interest in up there, or even create your own PRs. You go to the Flutter repo, create your PR, fix it, they'll review it, and it'll say, awesome, there you go. And your implementation will be used by millions of people. So what's better than that?
There was a question.
Interesting one right here. Oh,
go ahead, Scott.
Well, there is one that's really interesting for today with null safety, and something I hear discussed a whole lot. Oh, you were just about to go with this one as well?
No, but I might have. Yes.
No, you did not get to this one on Stack Overflow, Randall Stack Overflow, man, because this one's out of YouTube.
Okay, right. Although I had similar questions on my how to use no sound null safety in a couple of my videos. I did get questions something like this. So of course the advice is, you can't a 2.12 main can't really take advantage of anything that's lower, and lower can't really take advantage of anything higher. There's one exception to that, which is if you invoke the Dart command or the Flutter run command or the Flutter build command with no sound null safety as a parameter, you're building the entire app from top to bottom, regardless of whether it's NNBD or not, 2.12 or not. So if you're willing to live with the kind of null safety we had 6 months ago, which is pretty complete, but all being done at runtime, you always can sort of mix and match. But it's just still, given the downfalls I've seen of trying to use older libraries and newer libraries that are across that boundary, I'd still trust the recommendations, which is make sure that you upgrade from the bottom up.
Well, and the other thing too is, this is just one small step from the next problem, because even if you do try to postpone, what you could theoretically do is develop your app in your own little bubble, in a lower version of Dart with lower versions of dependencies. I had someone doing that in a professional situation, and I turned around and created the CI/CD for it. Well, when I created the CI/CD for the shop, basically, I made it with the newest version of Flutter, of course. So the first time they tried to run it, they couldn't even get to the point of running the test. They couldn't get the app to compile. And they were like, well, there must be something wrong with the CI/CD because it runs just fine on the desktop. Well, yeah, it runs fine on the desktop because you haven't updated Flutter in 2 months. So you're going to run into this if you are trying to use things pre 212. You're only going to be able to hang on to that for so long, because even if it's not null safety, there's going to be some other change that's going to come up and bite you. And unless you set up your CI/CD with the same versions of everything that you're developing with,
Right.
and develop in your own little tiny bubble and only send out compiled code. I mean, yes, you could do that, but the next question is why?
Yeah, and the tooling is there. Their tooling is definitely there to help the migration process. How to do a Flutter pub upgrade, specifically calling out, trying to include null safe apps or null safe libs. So there's work being done, and technically, I agree this is not a breaking change. But it sure the heck feels like it when you look at the whole ecosystem. So I understand the frustration. I'm hearing a lot of it on Stack Overflow and the other places that I patrol. And I'm using that word now, patrol, because that's where I'm going all the time. I'm seeing a lot of concern about all that, and I totally get it. Except here's what I'm a little confused by. People are saying, well, I moved to Flutter 2.0, I broke everything, I'm rolling back to the previous version of Flutter. I think maybe it's because you also upgraded your Pubspec to 2.12 because you wanted to be one of the cool kids already. And of course that's going to break stuff, because then when it does its version dependency checking and stuff like that for a pub get, it's going to say, oh, we have 2.12, we can pull in all the 2.12 packages now. But maybe you aren't really ready for that, so be careful of that.
Yeah. We've got another interesting one in YouTube right now from a beginner's standpoint. Let me find it here.
Well, if you can't find it, I've got one here.
Migrating.
I'll bring this one up for now.
Go ahead.
What should we do about mobile devices with low GPU specs?
Upgrade.
Flutter Gallery and animations are super slow. To be honest, though, the Flutter team do a lot to make sure these work. Now, the question I would have is: are you looking at a release version of your app? The release version of the apps are very different from your debug version. Your debug version will definitely be a lot slower because it does a lot more in the background. There is a page called I think it's rendering shaders. You can just Google Flutter the shaders, I think it is, and you'll find there's a bit of advice in there. You run your app in profile mode. It gathers the JSON file together of the shaders, and then you ship it with your app, and it will know up front that these animations are going to take place and pre-compile those shaders for you. But in general, this kind of goes back to the whole jank problem that we've been seeing, and this is more about the fact that as an animation actually starts, it compiles the shader for it, right? So when you use like an opacity, it compiles the shader for opacity and uses it on that widget at that time. And what we're now seeing is that there's a kind of at the moment they're looking at the Flutter team themselves are looking at this aspect of they want to give control to the developer. So we have a way in Flutter doing pre-cache image. This allows us to determine that we want this image up front, and it gives us the control to load the image before it gets displayed on the screen. And they're looking at a very similar thing for shaders. The idea is that we can pick and choose when we want to load up an animation before we need it. And that then gives us the control. There'll probably be some libraries that come out to optimize animations, but the animation, I suspect that animations library itself would have optimizations for this specific case.
Yeah, I believe the animation class already has a pre-warm or something like that method you can call on it. I just noticed that the other day when I was crawling through the SDK. So there might be a way to do it already.
The end of the day, if the device isn't capable of doing it, we're not doing anything that the operating system wouldn't be able to do already. So if you do experience the bugs with on slower devices, the Flutter team definitely want to know. If it runs a Flutter app, it should be able to run it smoothly. They want to know that fact. So make an issue ticket, dump a reproducible example, the information about the device, as much information as you can have about the device and the GPU and everything else. And then also, even better, drop a little animated GIF or MP4 or something like that where they can see what's actually happening. And then, yeah, it will be tracked as any other bug that's that's within Flutter.
Nice. So here's the one I was looking for. Now, this is often something beginners will talk about, and it's important to know because Flutter does use the composite pattern. Come on, mouth. Mm-hmm. And what ends up happening is when you create a container, now Flutter is only going to use the parts that you set parameters for, and it's going to strip everything down to the simplest possible setup.
Did you read the question?
Yeah, it's performance. Yes.
I'm just asking if you read the question out because I missed it.
Oh, container. Okay, and I'm sorry, and it says size widget, but I'm assuming they mean sized box.
Yes,
so,
I'm pretty sure he's the difference between container and size box.
Is there a time difference? So basically, also, is there performance? Now, if you look in the YouTube chat, and to everybody who is watching on the video here, it is also on the recorded video. It's also going to be there. I am putting links to the documentation for the classes for each of these.
All right, guys.
The best thing to do is dig into it and read it carefully. Ciao. Thanks for being here, buddy. But the best thing to do really is to dig into it and read it because it all depends on what you're doing, what parameters you're using, and 1,000 other things.
There is to be said, if you just need to reserve or size an area of the screen using the size box or container for that, container makes a size box, right? That's literally what it does inside. However, a container can't be made constant, and it can't make its children can't be made constant. So, and every rebuild, it will be creating a new container instance of the container widget, right? There's not too much overhead on that, but there is still logic and CPU time that's being used on that, whereas on the size widget, there isn't that happening. And if you can make it constant, then it says using the same instance every time. There's literally minimal overhead happening there. So yes, if you're just trying to use a size box. So if you're just trying to reserve an area of the screen, like a margin or something like that, then yeah, size box, definitely.
So real quick though on this, Simon, let's see if this shows up properly. I'm not sure that it will. Let me try to make sure this is going to show properly. Of course not. Now, this is one of the notes in the constructor for container, and it's something that can baffle people a lot of times. If the child is null and the constraints are unbounded or also null, the container will try to expand to fill all of the space. However, the rest of that is supposed to read unless the parent provides unbounded constraints, in which case the container will attempt to be as small as possible. Simon, we've got a lot of people out there going, what?
I wasn't paying attention to what you were saying. I'm trying to find the next question. Sorry.
Of course not. We're talking about the child parameter with a container and how the container sizes itself according to the child at times. If the constraints are unbounded or also null, and if the child is null and the constraints on the container are unbounded or also null, the container will try to expand to be as big as possible, unless the parent provides unbounded constraints, in which case the container will be as small as possible.
This URL, which we'll post in the chat as well, this takes you to the constraints article on the Flutter website, and that talks about constraints go down, sizes go up, and children are positioned by their parent. And it goes for a lot of these rules and explains a lot of these use cases. We could spend a long time just talking about the very intricacies of this, but there's lots of really good spelt out examples on there on how the behaviors work, and I highly recommend it to everyone.
And they're in Dartpad and embed, so you can just run them right there and tweak them to see how it changes. So it's really nice.
So I'll put that in the live chat right now so everyone can save the link for later.
And who wrote that, Simon?
Marcelo, mainly.
Marcelo did?
Marcelo, I think it was, Marcelo. His name's on there.
Okay.
Nice. Mark Glassberg.
Actually,
he is the same gentleman who came up with fast immutable collections.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Been looking at that.
Can we use C and Flutter to write high performance apps? Yes. There you go.
Why?
So let's be clear about this. C is not going to get you any more performance. Well, obviously on scenario. I'm not they come wrong on scenario, right? But for the most part, in general purpose, right? What you're building as an app, if you're going to do something like image processing, yes, you're going to use like libjpeg or some image processing thing, and yes, use what's called FFI, foreign function interface, as part of Dart. And if you go to api.dart.dev, you can look up FFI and how it works. But basically, you can call a function from C, that function is defined in C, and run it from Dart. Now, for the most part, when your Flutter application is compiled, it's compiled to native machine code and optimized as such. So you do get a lot of the benefits that you wouldn't get with other languages that run through intermediary steps. So things like a lot of .NET runs through IL code, which is intermediate code, and you have obviously Java uses class bytecode, which goes through the Java VM. But to be honest, like the levels are a bit, it depends on what you're doing. And if you're trying to get that high performance, I'd suggest try whatever you're trying to do in Dart first, see what the performance is like. If it's unreasonable, then go down the C route, because you'll spend a lot more time doing the C and memory management and all this than you would do doing it in Dart.
And be sure you profile it too, because most programmers cannot actually ever figure out what's slowing their code down.
Yeah.
Not without a tool. Use the tools. We have the tools for a reason.
And there's also another
We have the technology.
Yes.
So come, Robert, please add your bit.
Yeah. That's one of my main concern doing art. When you work with a huge image, you have a lot of treatments, and you can get some basics real quick with Dart. But we are really pushing right now just to get parallelism on the computation. And currently, it's not even possible, even with isolate. So in this very rare case, moving to Rust or C, that's the only reason to get there.
Yeah.
But like you said, it's very expensive and complicated.
Yeah, there's also, and what you're getting from that is really like, even if, let's say I'm making a Photoshop clone, right? I could do that in Flutter, and you could do a lot of that manipulation, but the actual raw, all the UI can be done in Flutter and everything else, but the raw bit of engine code that actually manipulates the image and does that can be done in a different language like C or Rust. So you're getting the advances of being able to create all this nice interactive UI, multi-platform and everything else, and then you get to compile the engine part of your application that does the hard work and have that in Rust or C. And that can take advantage of many platform things like lots of cores in your CPU and multiple embedding, and as Robert said, not having to do with isolates. However, they have, I will mention that it's one of the other announcements that came out, Maxim, I can't remember his last name. He's a GD in Australia or New Zealand. But he came up with lightweight isolates and isolate groups, and that's actually one of the Flutter Engage community talks. You'll find it on YouTube. Highly recommend the community talk. And there's a lot of community talks in there. I think, Robert, do you have one in there? I can't remember. There's a bunch of community talks. And
but I discussed the subject with him. Very, very interesting. You have to see that.
Oh, yeah. It's super interesting. Highly recommend if anyone that's trying to get the extra level performance out of Flutter.
Awesome. There's one more here. People trying to migrate to null safety often get confused by these symbols. The IDE is showing me that I can use the null check bang instead of using the null safety question mark. Can't find any documentation. Here's the really, really short version. The exclamation mark basically means you are telling the compiler that you personally guarantee this is not going to be null when you get to this point.
It will do a null check, but it's explicitly saying, I want you to do a null check at this point, right? So if it does break, you don't get complete dead crash, you'll get exceptions thrown, right? But it's at that explicit point that you're making that. Otherwise, a variable type is considered not null by default, right?
Right.
Whereas the question mark, and the question mark has I mean, going on to the null safety question mark, it depends on where you use a question mark. Question mark is used in several places as an operator, which is very confusing. But specifically, null safety is used on the type. So when you have your type, so the name of a class followed by the question mark, it means that instance of that variable can not just be the instance of this class, but also be the value of null as well.
Right.
And then by doing these things, the code will act appropriately and tell you that, oh, you're trying to use null, you're trying to use a variable, but it could be null at this point. You need to do a null check. You need to fix this part of your code. This is a bug. And this gets you out of those problems where it's a well-known NPE. Is the if you look up NPE, null
pointer exception. Come on.
What? What's the second letter stand for?
Null pointer exception.
Null pointer exception. Yeah, and it's been over the years. I mean, but honestly, for years, I think Linux actually reserves the very beginning part of memory at the zero address to actually crash with specifically these things. When you try and access that area of memory, it just crashes out the application saying you can't do this. This is bad.
I think you should also include in understanding this that there's operators we've had for a long time that have question mark in them, like question mark dot says don't call the method following this if this is null. That's still there. That hasn't changed. The value still could be null based on other things coming into it if you permit that in the typing of it further up. That didn't change. Question mark still means what it used to mean, which is if the left-hand side is null, then evaluate and use the right-hand side. Those are both still there. And you can use them in a null safe program. You just have to understand, are you permitting this value to possibly be null? Because most of the time now the answer is no, unless you're doing something explicit, like the exclamation mark or the question mark on the type.
I will say that
I just put a link. Oh, I'm sorry. I just put a link in the YouTube chat to Seth Ladd's awesome 2015 article, 2015, on all those null-aware operators, which is different than null safety. Yeah. Those let you work with potential situations with null. And I was able to grab that so fast because I look at it once a week.
Nice.
I really do.
I'm gonna mention though that the key thing behind null safety, like using null as a value, is the problem that every programmer has. Like they treat null as not something that does not exist. Like, so for instance, and I've done this myself in before jumping to null safety. This would be my de facto way of dealing with things, and that is, let's say I had a login for an app, then the user is logged out. The current user value is null, meaning that there is no user, right? And then when I log in, that value streams down as like the current user object, and it sets the current user to that object, and therefore it's not null, so there is a user. And then I follow that up with another getter, which is logged in, which just checks is the value null or not, which is a really, really bad way of doing it, because then you can get into the problem that you might access it, dereference it, which is access the value, and it's null and it crashes, right? So what you want to do in those situations is define a static constant version of your model, name it no user, right? Or logged out user or something like that. And it has blank fields, like a blank username field and and the ID is like 0 or some other default value. And then when you want to see if that is the logged out user, you just compare this object to the static constant version of this object, and this identity match. If the two things match, then you are the currently logged out user, which means you're not logged in. So you're now treating not null as a value. You have your own definition of what null is in what a no user in this case is in this scenario, right? So
there are many patterns to handle this. Another one that came to mind while I was listening to your previous statement was instead of making null a special value, create an enum in your object that says logged out, logged in, being verified, whatever the state of that user is. And that way you can have multi states for it. You can also then make sure that if you do a switch on it, it covers every case. which both of those are very valuable.
What's really interesting is that when you get that reference object, which is empty or whatever you want, you can really, really easily enable state matching in your code, which makes it really, really much more readable. And you'll point, now we got the protection. What can be really interesting is what's coming on to Dart now. Like you said, there's a lot of new pattern that will reach us, like, to better control the flow, like in functional programming. So that's going to be really interesting. Maybe, Simon, you get some roadmap information. But
I'm actually I'll bring up the URL that everyone should be following. So when it comes to the Dart language itself, there is a language repo. I'll put it in the live chat for everyone to go check out. That URL is where you'll find the project that the Dart team itself uses to track language features. And in there, they're tracking things like support for tuples in the language, support for lots of new language features, and extensions of where we're going to go from here. So yeah, very interesting stuff. Was that with kind of what you were getting at there, Robert?
Yeah. I'm thinking specifically, do you have a date for pattern matching? Which is the next step?
I've not seen that, but there is a pattern matching ticket in that. I haven't seen it, actually. I haven't looked at it for a few weeks, but I know as I think Bob Nystrom was saying in the Flutter Engage talk that they're obviously trying to bring in these new language features, but they need to decide what is meta programming and what is actually. So this is all ongoing right now. Now that null safety is out of the way, not out of the way, but you know what I mean. Now they've got to that release stage, their team, the Dart team and the Flutter team, can concentrate on these other new language features and what they can provide to the language. So we're going to see, I think we're kind of trying to look forward to the next point that we're going to see a release with features in. But I do want to say that I did, I think there was a whole thing around unions and union types. Oh, sorry, have I missed? You're pointing down, and is that? What?
At the chat. I'm pointing at the chat where it is here on my screen.
Yeah, so
we have an internal chat.
There's a lot about union types, and one of the interesting things that I did recently was to use an enum and make a generic when mixin that I could use. That would, I think I did this. I think I did this with Randall the other day, but it actually really worked. And the amount of code I had was just a few lines. Whereas when I looked at some of the code generated stuff, it was just stupidly complicated with lots of different typing and generics. And the thing I was doing was really simple. And I kind of feel like once we start seeing this in the language, I think we'll start seeing those Kotlin kind of power user features.
Please don't say Kotlin. No, it's more complicated. You know, I'm always picky on that because I came from the Scala world, and there's a long history, and people just know Kotlin and they think Kotlin got the stuff.
I'm not disagreeing with that, but I do think there is definitely power features that we get in that we can get in the language, and if we can get them in the language, like you said, like pattern matching and this kind of includes tuples and some various other things, that will really see the next generation.
It's going to be very, very elegant. I mean, that concept with widgets and the state of object is going to be really elegant, and you can move a lot of logic from your method inside your widget at the composition in the build method. That's wow. It's going to be really cool.
I'm glad you brought up
that means we're putting our logic in our UI.
Some kind
Simon, you used to yell at me for that 3 years ago.
If you get the new object, you don't need to get it in the code.
Randall, what are you saying?
I'm trying to get this will answer the last 2 minutes of conversation. This is the problem. This is why I'm trying to get it out there. So Raphael Wetzel in the chat asked what Simon described is the reason that we need ADTs with problem, sum, and none types. I stumbled across a few days ago this library called Darts with a Z, D-A-R-T-Z. It's in the pub. It essentially creates functional programming, strongly typed functional programming on top of Dart. So it's and there's no code build. So you can implement those multi-branch wins, the pattern matching, the sum and none types, except it's called either It's very close to Scala. And that's why when you mentioned Scala, I went crazy. I went, yeah, that's great.
Scala is one of the best library of Scala. And what is really interesting, as a developer, we also need to learn the pattern on every other language. And what is really interesting right now is Scala is object-oriented and also functional programming, and they get very, very interesting combination. And what is really interesting right now is that we have a lot of very competent developers that do understand this pattern, and they are bringing this to Dart. And having that combined with the Dart feature and the widget pattern, that's going to be very, very successful.
Yeah. I mean, I stumbled across this package because somebody had used it in a YouTube video a couple weeks ago to do error handling. So one of the things they do is they return what they call an either object. And the left side of it is the error, and the right side of it is the original data. They return it back as essentially a tuple, and it goes all the way up the streams, and you can grab stuff out of there. And there's the equivalent of stream. There's the equivalent of the multi-way branching based on strongly typed enums, essentially, the equivalent of that in their language. So it's done.
What is really interesting with that, why I said we move some part from the logic to the UI, is that if you have this kind of object, you treat the error or the exception in the UI by displaying another widget and not having a try catch that you may have forgotten and then having a white screen of death.
Yes,
so
but
it will protect you from a lot of error because you never break the flow.
It looks like it'll solve a lot of problems, and it also made me sit through 7 hours of Scala training because I need to understand what that. Except they got to my favorite ugly word, monad. The moment you mention monad, I go crazy because I still haven't seen it described better.
Inherited widget, monad. There's really no difference.
Oh, sure there is. Sure there is. Right. But yeah, definitely check out Darts. It's in the pub. Been in there for a while.
And
pass this test.
Thank you for the developers.
Because George had also pointed out Darts in the chat, and Raf, I'm really glad that you're answering questions and all. But I happen to know George and Raf both have the link to be able to get here on the stream, and I'm wondering why they haven't come on yet. Because I've made sure that they both have the link.
Camera
guys.
That's the name of the author of the library.
Yep.
Let's see what other questions we had from last week that we can answer. So we've got a few more questions here.
Talk about SEO
again.
How to use
and platform channels are good too. But if you have SEO questions, you got to understand people have been asking them like every 5 minutes for the past 4 weeks.
Yeah. What was the Randall? Did you? It was at the talk yesterday that covered SEO. There was some stuff recently, wasn't there, that covered some SEO questions?
No, we didn't actually get much into that yesterday. I didn't demonstrate anything or even talk about anything. I was so fascinated by Chris Sells and the answers he had that I didn't. I just let him talk.
So I honestly think that regarding SEO, I think that I would have the opinion right now. We let the dust settle, right? Let everyone put their ideas into writing and try some stuff out, right? And we'll start seeing the community come together and looking at SEO as a whole solution. Now we have Flutter Web stable, right?
Yeah. It's definitely the right time to be looking at that. Yes.
And two good places just to start is to remember that you want to put your text the same as any other web page, any JavaScript web page. It's still going to render your JavaScript. The crawler is still going to look at what text you put in there, what questions does your website answer. These are all standard things. Mm-hmm. And the only other one is that if you have a large site, even a medium-sized site, deferred imports can be huge, because what will happen is the system will download your entire file and then say, that's what it needs to do just to render the first page. And if you've got 10 pages worth of material there, it's going to turn around and say, well, your first page takes 8 seconds to download, so your SEO is terrible. Not true. But what you've got to do is use deferred imports to break that download up so that everything will load fast and the first page will load as quickly as possible. And that'll help your SEO. There are a lot of other things that people are going to come up with but that's a good place to start.
And Simon's actually referring to a the arrow going the right way there. I was referring to an experiment that I have working right now that I'm slowly building out, where I had the ability to change the home page using DOM access, no JavaScript at all, just DOM access, very early in the app running time, which means that it would be the thing that the crawlers would see. So if they want to see a description node or a description meta tag or whatever, or a change in the index tag or whatever, it would be very, very early. And from all my understanding about how the crawlers actually run this as JavaScript, it would also have to be done for the links and the pages that the links generate. It would have to be done at that time too. So it's good that it doesn't all have to be in index HTML, because you do navigate from page to page. So it's going to be different on each page. You need to be able to then hook in real quick and get the right metadata for the page you just went to. And I think the technology I have is sort of the budding seed of some of that.
You heard it here first, folks.
Right here, we're working on it. We got top people working on it. Top people.
So how to use platform channels when app goes the background? I honestly, they're platform channels is one of those complex things. They only works on the main Dart isolate. There are ways of communicating between them, but not with platform channels. There's a way of dropping messages through the isolates. There's a really good example, and that is the FCM package. The FCM package has uses when you get a message delivered in the background, it goes to the foreground. And then there's another package, which I forget what it is, but Android Alarm Manager, I believe, also uses background stuff in Android. So I'd suggest you go check out those two prime examples. First, these are Flutter first level plugins, straight from the Flutter team that you'll be able to look at and get some idea about how you deal with background stuff on mobile with Flutter. But yeah, from a desktop perspective, just to mention that now we have desktop, you can spin up another isolate in the background and just communicate that way. You wouldn't need to necessarily use platform channels to offload work. When your app goes into the background desktop, that's more like hiding the window. So your app is actually still running. There's no background or foreground that's per se on desktop. So anything else? Anyone else want to add? Sorry, I kind of wanted to just get through that quickly.
Just one of our answer men is here, and
wow.
Hello.
There he is.
Your hair was about that long last time I saw you. What happened?
Pandemic.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Rafael, who has been answering your questions in YouTube chat. And by the way, Majid is back. I don't know if he's ready to be on the camera. I'm giving him a little warning. Here it comes.
Oop. Hey, and he's muted. He's muted. There we have one of those. One of those every day.
Somebody had to do it. Thank you, Majid.
Somebody. You are. Yeah.
I made your day, right? So
yeah, we're happy.
Well, now that you've done it, I don't have to.
Yes, it won't happen to the rest of us.
Hello, everyone.
You've ruined it, Randall.
Yep.
Shall we work our way through a few more questions? Otherwise, we're going to have a list from last week onto the next week.
All right. Yeah, I guess we are here for Q&A, right?
Yep. It's in the name. It's in the name.
My web app is shown in dark mode in the Instagram web view. How can I force my app to stay in light mode? Jens. That's a good question. It would depend on Instagram, I guess. No, I think this is. I think I might have seen this flying around at the time, and the problem here is Instagram forces dark mode in the browser. So your Flutter app sees that it's dark mode and goes into dark mode. There is actually a theme mode in Flutter which you can force into the light theme instead of the system default theme, and that should solve that. However, there's no reason, and this is the problem you might have when using anything in WebView. Instagram have access to the DOM tree of your WebView. They can inject CSS and make your web page, your essentially your app look dark, right? I don't know the details, so that also might be what's happening. So just be aware. I would opt for the idea that you install an app and use it and have it deep link into your app. So when the Instagram open it up, it opens up the app instead. Problem solved. Any comments, anyone?
Sounds good to me.
We inject the CSS after.
Oh God, no.
Oh yeah, I can do it. I know how to move the DOM around now.
We have a top developer on it right now. You hear?
Yes, top men. Yeah, we'll fix it. We'll fix it in post.
Can anyone tell me? I have
Post?
Yeah.
I have an install of all plugins for Firebase project chat app, but there is an error. Undefined name Firestore.
Oh, too bad.
I suspect he's probably using newer versions that they changed the names. Check the documentation. That's what I would say to that one.
I'm seeing this actually come up a lot in people are pasting old examples of sort of round one, and we're now on round two. And round one has different styles like .docs and versus .documents, things like that. And you have to keep up with the times. There were some breaking changes between the old style and new style.
Yeah, the tutorial code. That I'm starting to run into that as well, because you go grab the tutorial code that was written a year and a half ago.
Ancient
breaking
history.
Changes. And that it's unfortunate because people who are new, they shouldn't have to deal with that. They shouldn't have to fix the tutorial. It reminds me of when I was studying Android with Google Udacity. It was, the code was so old. Simon, you remember this. The code was so old. I had to go take a course on Gradle to be able to go fix Gradle before I could get the sample code to compile. And then I finished the course on Gradle. And you remember that, Simon? Because how many times was I coming into Zoom screaming that the stupid code that was 4.5 years old?
I think there are some basic rules about using Flutter that everybody should pay attention to. If you type in something from somewhere, or you have a very old app and it blows up by saying no such method, go look at the docs. Look at the docs that are current up there.
The best thing you can do is go to the package that's import that it's coming from. Go to import there, click on changelog, and see what happened.
Yeah, that's one.
And it will tell you we had a breaking change. We changed the name of this function to this thing, and then you go change it, and it works. It's really straightforward.
And parallel to that, the second other important rule is if you get no such method being called on null, it almost certainly means you have a future or a stream that you didn't wait for properly. Mm-hmm. Almost certainly.
And I think we've said this before, analysis options, make sure your project has an analysis options YAML file, and you're using either Pedantic or Very Good Analysis or one of these other analysis options. Add your own in there. But it solves those problems. Use the linter. It really does help.
Yeah, and if you don't know what those are, those are the linter rules, which is analysis options, YAML. And if you don't know what that means, it's the stuff that gives you the squigglies that tells you what's wrong.
Squigglies. That's what we're going to call it now. You've got the squigglies.
You have squigglies in your code? Well, that's a problem you got to solve.
Yeah.
No, I'll tell you what. Bugs are a slippery slope because they lead to squigglies.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Next question. When upgrading to Flutter 2.0, why does my console say version solving failed on Flutter pub get?
Because it failed.
I think actually, that's obviously why. I think, Randall, you mentioned this earlier. The version of they're missing the environment Dart version, because if they're using 2.12 as the Dart version or above, then it's going to try and solve with null safe packages when upgrading to Flutter 2.0.
Which you can't always do.
If the environment SDK Dart version is lower than that, then it's going to version solve for null safe packages.
Yeah, and I think what's happening is Flutter 2.0 is creating a 2.12 Pubspec, where if you have an existing package and if you don't do a create, so in other words, if you're just using the Flutter new commands that came from 2.0 with some old code that you have, this shouldn't actually show up because you've already done a solution. They have a firing solution already with your previous setup, with your previous versions in the pub. So that shouldn't come up. This should only come up if you create something new and you try to use old packages out of pub, or if you try to go into an old project and you are forcing 2.12 now. I think that's the only time that should come up. What?
Well, I did have a different situation.
Oh.
I was using Firebase in some stuff, and you got to remember, we're right at the transition point. A lot of times people are running around trying to get their packages updated.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a situation where I was using Firebase Core, Firebase Auth, and Cloud Storage, I believe it was.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what happened was I ended up with this huge mess telling me what was wrong in about my pub versioning. And it said, because one depends on this thing and the other depends on that thing, but this other one depends on a lower version of the first thing, version solving failed. Because basically what ended up happening was more than one of them depended on a different package.
Yeah.
But they depended on different versions of that same package, which just tells you one of them had not been updated yet. And we're in that strange transition period. Null Safety has just gone live. We would have hoped that all the packages have been caught up by now, but remember, a lot of these packages are maintained and written by people in their off time, when they're not at work, when they're not walking the dog or taking out the trash or playing with their children. So they might not have gotten around to it just yet.
Yeah, and the claim was made that over thousands of packages in Pub have already been migrated, and there was a technology you could use of naming your package that had null safety in the name, so that the solver
that was in the preview.
Can know that about that?
That was in the previous before version of Flutter 2.0. Now we have the preview releases have now gone to official releases, right? So
right.
Yeah. What you can also do, you can remove all the versions from pub and then run pub outdated, and it will
solve everything.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
It'll try. It still may not find a firing solution.
We had this before, and I do want to be clear. You could leave, essentially, by leaving the version name blank, it's the same as putting the word any, the keyword any in there, which means any version. I'm happy with any version. Obviously, that can break your code, right? So it's great to version solve, but then you need to put the versions in, and you can go get the versions from the Pubspec log file. In fact, I think Randall did a nice little script which kind of did that, which I'm sure he'll post into the comments in the YouTube.
It's a little too long for that. Well, actually, no, it's one line. It's one liner.
So we'll put that in the description or something in a minute.
Yeah.
But the general gist of it, though, is that you definitely, if you're going to leave any, you could leave any. In fact, it was recommended at one point a long time ago to solve these version things from Android X at the time. If you're going to do that, commit your Pubspec log file, because that contains your locked-in version numbers. Okay, so either or, right? But if you just want, as I said, Raf's idea, remove all the versions, let it solve it, and then take those version numbers from your log file and put them into your Pubspec. Yeah, and now you've got a solved version of all your interdependencies.
Yeah, I think the claim was, and the pub upload may actually validate this, is that you don't want to publish anything to there, because one of those packages may change that you're depending on, and the next guy will get the updated package, and it might not exactly work. They might have broken the contract or something somewhere. And so you have to be careful about that. Yeah.
All right, moving on.
Got the question from the chat there. Oh, no. Oh, no. We don't want to answer this again, do we?
I know. It always comes up, but I want to know what, and I just want the name, and I want the name, Robert. What's your go-to state?
I got a response for that.
No, we don't want to hear that response. We have to bleep it out.
If it's a team project with a lot of people on it, I go for block. If it's a smaller project with a lot of advanced stuff, I go with a pod.
Okay. And Raf, your option, what would you choose at the moment?
Block.
There you go. So now you heard it here. You've heard all our other replies, so we don't want to have that on the screen anymore. Right.
That's right. Now yep.
Go on, do you have another question from the chat?
Oh no, I was just commenting. Basically, it's all we all basically go with provider, Riverpod, block, or vanilla. I mean, there are things in the framework that you can just write your own for something really small. I like Value Notifier.
Good advice when you're a beginner.
Yeah.
Go with that to understand the engineering.
Yeah, but use it to write small things first so you get a feel for them.
Yeah. Okay.
No, actually, that's not what that was. Sorry. They were asking, I believe Nawal has handled that. They needed an Arabic speaker to help them.
We have Arabic support in Flutter. We have well, actually,
we can talk about that.
But yeah, there's definitely some support around that. All right, so some more questions.
Well, there was the one I just posted in there. Is there, by Soft for You, is there a way to remove native white splash screen in Flutter? There's not only a way described where you do all the work by hand, there is now a number of packages that use a build step to basically replace the right file in the right place for both iOS and Android. You have to have a static screen for at least a little while, so make it pretty. And if you're smart, you'll make your first live frame be that and then transition away from it with an animation. That's cool, and that can be done. You don't necessarily want to get rid of the white splash screen. You can just go into, if you open up, like say for Android, your Android app, you open up the Android folder in Android Studio, and you can go edit that white screen to be whatever you want. It's just a normal native screen. Whatever widget. But that's what I'm saying. These packages do that editing for you. You don't have to be that smart.
And
right. You just run this command and it works.
And this package, does it do it also for web?
I don't know about web. No, I don't think about web.
We did that on the Hack 20 website, the flutterhackathon.com website. We did it so that it was just a background that was set on the page. Then when it rendered, it covered up the background, and we on first frame we removed the DOM tree background.
Oh, cool!
I found this really interesting to have this in one plugin for all platforms, if possible.
Okay.
If I find the One Ring, I will let you know.
Yes.
Just
one ring to roll them all, and together bind them.
One language, Dart.
Yes.
Come to the dark side.
Now this was brought up. What wasn't this brought up when Chris was here? I think.
If it was, it wasn't marked as being done, but I will mention it now. So can we set a minimum height and width in Windows or web to avoid overflow issue? Yeah, there is a Windows desktop. There is actually a desktop package for that. I'm not sure what the support is for multiple like Windows or Mac or Linux.
There is, I think, to the last news, BitDojo put support for all three.
So which one?
BitDojo is the guy who created the package, and you can set width and height for every platform.
This is the one I was thinking of that we had from previous.
Not thinking to this one.
If you have another one, please.
I'm looking at it.
So I'll move on for now. When an app is published, should we migrate also to null safety? You don't have to. There's nothing requiring you to. And we mentioned this in the last one, and that is, but if you do want to continue upgrading with Flutter, you have to go to null safety, right? So the point, you don't have to do it just now, and you can wait for your dependencies. So what I recommend is you switch up to null safety, see if your app breaks, see if you can resolve your dependencies as the null safe versions, and if you can't, go to those package owners, either submit a PR that you've done yourself or ask for them to make it null safe, and then take yourself back to where you were and wait for those responses to come in. And once you get those responses in and you do that, you can then take your entire app up past null safety and progress forward, right? And that's really what the requirement is. Nothing stops you from doing that. I have to be clear about this. You can include a dependency from a Git repo, meaning that you can fork someone else's package, make it null safe, submit them a PR, and then put that Git repo URL of your own username on GitHub into your application if you need to. So there's nothing stopping you. You don't have to wait for anyone if you don't want to. But that's a lot of work, obviously.
Yeah, that's a pretty powerful concept, actually, sort of in general about upgrading things and fixing things. You don't have to wait for the pub to get updated. If you know there needs to be a fix, besides submitting the issue and helping them along and maybe even submitting a PR, Pubspec can support both regional packages that are right near you. So you go .. / and then put somebody else's name there, or put the other package's name. And that's just local. It doesn't have to be published yet. And you can use it just as if it was published, which is really nice.
Another common practice is to break up your app into modules, and you break up into packages, which are just essentially modules, and then you include them with a path dependency prefix. And there's a whole page on this inside of the Dart Flutter Pubspec page on the Dart resources.
Yeah, it's on the Dart resources. Yeah.
This is
so not only path, you can also specify a Git repo, and that could be a GitHub. It even can drill down to a specific branch or tag. So you could say, I want version 4.7 in this repo, as long as there's public access to the repo. It can't be private. But so awesome to be able to do that, so you can figure out stuff before it actually gets updated in the official places. Really, really nice.
So, and something that Scott brought up on the screen just a second ago is that, switching up to null safety also gives you a performance boost.
Yep.
What the performance boost is subjective, right? But the Flutter team in that, when they did their announcement, I think it was like up to 17% was what they was looking at, around that sort of, I would say it's around up to 20%, that 20% mark. But the point here is that there's a lot less code that actually has to be built because it doesn't have to check every access. And I'll give an example of when null safety really performs well. And I've seen this personally. The image package, I was doing image processing where I had to modify every pixel, and every pixel is an integer value. And those accesses all had to be wrapped with null safety checks. Now that we have null safety, you can do a manipulation on a larger scale without having the overhead of doing null checks on every access of every pixel, right? And that immediately saves so much in CPU time. It's unreal. Let's bring up a few more questions, and we'll go back to the live chat. When the video player, when will video player and audio and WebView be available in desktop? We spoke about this earlier, Soft for you. There's no timer we know of, and the best thing I can say is raise an issue ticket on the repos, see what response you get, try and go use the. I'm gonna drop this in there. The Flutter community resources that are out there. We have flutter.dev/community. Go there, reach out to other community members, start your own little group together, and work on porting one of these things, or working on port one of these things to the desktop. Make sure you reference the official issue tickets and bring it up, because there's so much we can do together. It's too much for one person, a lot of these things, but together we can get stuff happening.
Yeah, make sure you first file an issue against the repo that you're planning on changing, because it might also be that the owners of that package, not like we're all owners, it's community stuff, but there might be the owners are already planning on doing that and just need some assistance, or they would want to coordinate various groups that they've heard are doing this. But so I always post issues. Almost everybody's using GitHub. In spite of people's no, never mind, I won't go into that. But GitHub is a nice watering hole. It's a great place to add issues, get pull requests processed, all sorts of wonderful things. It's just like it's really has become the modern community place. Anyone remember SourceForge? Yes,
I remember SourceForge. It still exists for some people.
It's insane. It's still there. Yes.
Yeah, SVN.
SVN. Yes, you have to use SVN.
CVS.
Yes.
Don't think about those days.
I'm old enough to remember. Yes.
Why is Dart test slower than Flutter test? Running Dart test takes longer time than Flutter test.
Isn't it launching like the fake browser thing?
No. I would say that there's probably a specific use case happening there, but please check the issue tickets on the Flutter/Flutter repo and the Dartlang SDK repo. Check to see if anyone's raised this issue. You might find there's a workaround in there that you can add an extra parameter or whatever it might be. And if no one has, there might be someone that's done a PR or a fix for it. So, there's way too much out there for all of us to answer or know about. But please, check their issue tickets.
But we can make up answers about anything. So, yeah. I would suspect, though, that they're not comparing apples and oranges. I think what they're talking about is they launched Dart test and it seems to go fast. And Flutter test takes longer, but I think it's testing more. It actually has to build the equivalent of the DOM or equivalent of the widget tree and things like that. It has to build all that in order to test your test. If you're saying, I have a button that has a 4 on it and I can push it.
If you run a Dart test, you're doing unit tests. It shouldn't have to start up all that. It should actually be doing less work.
Yeah.
So it might just be that your test cases end up doing more work during setup and teardown. I mean, it's so subjective.
Yeah.
There shouldn't be much difference. I remember there being an issue about this, and when they merged the test package together, and there was some extra parameters missing. So maybe you'll find an issue ticket on it. I can't remember anything specific though.
Okay.
Who wants to answer this one? How to create package from some other design guidelines? Architecture-wise, is it better to build on top of widgets app or extend on top of Material app path?
Don't extend widgets.
Well, I mean, that's the way the Material app and Cupertino app work, but then you lose a lot of what you couldn't use any of the Material app widgets, right? You couldn't use Inkwell, or in fact, you couldn't use Material and text. Text depends on the Material app generating a few things, so there might be some complications there. What would be best? Do you know what? I would honestly go. As much as Randall says, don't do that. I would probably not extend it. Extend is the wrong word. If you look at Material app, inside it uses the widgets app as just a child. I do that. Do exactly. Just replicate what Material app does, and change it to exactly what you want it to do, and see how it behaves.
Yeah, extend behavior by composing rather than inheriting. That's what I'm saying. Because when you're doing composition, you don't have to worry about the protocol of the thing you're composing adding new optional things. If you're extending, every time they add a new parameter, even if it's an optional parameter, your extension also has to obey that. And that's a lot of tightening.
What is interesting is that we were talking at the beginning about Ubuntu, and Ubuntu is doing just that. Then the next guideline we can see is Fluent UI, and I'm sure only Microsoft,
the Fluent UI
stuff, and Google team can go to implement the whole stuff.
So actually, I'm gonna that someone in the community has already implemented Fluent UI, and it can be found. But it's not
reasonable.
It's not official, but I assume that the Microsoft team are going to reach out to them and hopefully bring them into the fold in some way, and because it's got literally all the widgets there. I don't know how they approach that, but
it's quite difficult because the guideline is changing a lot.
Yeah, but I have to say
it's quite difficult. Why, Robbie?
Because the Fluent, what is very, very difficult is that when you have a visual language, you have a lot of guidelines, and they are kind of fixed, and you have an owner of this thing. One person that really perceives everything. And you need to work on that. But Fluent UI is not finished. I mean, if you take one product from Microsoft, it's different from another one. So it's very difficult to implement a language when you have different level of interpretation.
Well, it's like we had the material guidelines changed, didn't they? And we had to change over our Flutter apps from one version to the next 2015.
Yeah, but it's almost every 2 years, not say.
But something that was said by Ken was that they use Material app, and they're just building widgets that look and behave like the Yaru ones. So I would go as far as to say, honestly, you could do it either way. I don't think it all depends on what you're trying to achieve, really, with your architecture and your design. You can just build up your own custom widgets, do whatever you want. You have full control of every pixel. Right, I think we have one more question from our old question, so we'll get that done, and then we'll go back to live chat. So, have you ever thought about doing what Electron does in desktop? I
think about it every day.
Does on or did too?
Yeah, I was thinking to what Electron does in the past. Now there's a lot of new solution coming on the market, and it's getting really interesting. Not only Flutter, but Flutter, yes.
So me and I think I mentioned this before. I think I can find it. Yeah, here we go. We actually, me and Norbert wrote an article 2018 talking about this problem. I posted the link in the chat, which was called what was it called? Flutter, a real competitor to Electron. And we actually ran Dart and Flutter as a desktop application for the first time. This was before Hummingbird. This was before Flutter Live, and we compared it then, and the power. And I think this is the key. You can just take your mobile app and run it on desktop, and you see that working. That's so powerful. it is already it was a competitor then, and it's still a competitor now. But it really depends on what features and functionality you're going to get. And Chrome, the Chrome API, I don't know if anyone knows, Electron is based on Chrome, so you're getting things like local storage, you're getting all these other things, right? So until we can see that we have the same function set as Electron, then it's not going to be a switch one-to-one. I don't think there's ever going to be one is built with completely different technology, right? But there's no reason why you can't replicate your UI of your Electron app in Flutter. And to those that think that's a lot of work, Flutter is so quick to develop UIs. You'll be so surprised about how quick you can move that. Norbert recreated Slack in Flutter back in 2018, and we did it within a couple of weeks, right? Like the main UI at the time, the main sort of chat interface. And it's, you'll be so surprised about how quick you can move with Flutter as a UI toolkit.
And that's to take that in a slightly different direction. One of the things I've kind of been pushing for is to bring in the designer and literally having the designer sitting behind you and saying, what do you want? And just have them turn around and say, okay, well, I want a circle at this part of the screen and a square over it. And then we need to have this thing. You mean like that? You mean like that? Yeah. Okay, a little left, sure. A little right, sure. What about in pink? Done. And one of the things, and I shouldn't say this because this could like put us out of business in some ways, but if the designers really figure this out, that they can probably knock out a mock-up faster in Flutter than Figma or in Adobe, then they'll just start doing it in Flutter, and then we won't have any UIs to write because the designers already wrote them.
And they can be functional instead of just sitting around. That's actually how
your app is written at that point.
That's how we got VBA, actually. It's a long story, but a short story. I'll do the short version of it. But we got VBA because they wanted to have a language to mock up displays. And they had to have enough tooling behind it to be able to have the mocks work correctly. And then Microsoft just started shipping it as part of their apps. So that's how we got VBA.
I mean, we've got tools right now. We have Adobe XD allows to export into Flutter with a plugin. We've got a few other utilities. I forget of the names off the top of my head that do that and aiming to do that. But the problem here is
Figma.
Figma does that as well. Yeah, there's a plugin for Figma, and there is a problem though, and that is that Flutter's UI is code. You can put logic within the UI, and if you make any changes to those things, those UI. The generated code, now you've got a problem that you want to make a change in your design tool, you re-export, and now you've got a conflict with your original code changes. There's always been the problem, and this has been the problem with all code-generated UIs that are dependent on this sort of infrastructure, and its power is also its loss in that situation. Now, there are ways of working around that, and I did this for a company a long time ago. In fact, 2014, we did server-side rendering. And the key here, and you can do this with Flutter, is you create modules out of your UI, and then you can, from the server side, you can control maybe RESTful core JSON. You can request what things are displayed on the screen and what places. So essentially, you've achieved that kind of same sort of giving the designer control of UI, but at a more modular level, not at the per pixel level, right? And then that allows you to have a bit more flexibility.
And also there's a lot of new research and developments. You have stuff from Alibaba who try to create a full application from JPEG, from raw image. And also you have the experimentation with GPT-3, when you describe what you want in the screen and it generates the stuff. And I think maybe in 1 or 2 years, we can have the same. It's the skeleton of the app, not more.
Here's one for everyone. What is your opinion on relying heavily on code generators, freeze, JSON serializable, injectable, etc.?
Just opinions, huh?
It was an opinion. So
we've got some reliance on them, that's for sure.
I love using freeze, but for the last project I was working on, question arise when there's too much entity to transform. It can take a lot of time to generate everything.
The key, though, is also to mention is that you don't, every time you compile your Dart app, you're not running all these things. You're running code generation as a separate step, right? So you don't have to necessarily wait for code generation before you can execute your app,
Right.
which is another advantage. But we saw this again during the Flutter 2.0 launch video, which was meta-programming, this idea that we can take advantage of code generation to achieve some of those things, like we were talking about earlier, like enums with extra values, or some more of the sort of when union types and things like that. This sort of code generation can really just basically get rid of the boilerplate for us. And it's definitely a lot easier to achieve code generation with Dart and Flutter than any of the other sort of methods that I've seen in other libraries and SDKs before. Raf, you did I remember a few years ago you did a talk, didn't you, on code generation?
Yes, I did, and I like code generation, but it's also worth to mention to put the path of the classes that you want to watch by build runner. So check this out. It's in build.yaml, and you can specify the path so it will be faster. And also, while you are developing, put the build runner in watch mode.
Yep.
So it doesn't have to start every time, and it's much faster. Yeah.
I think my biggest complaint about code generation, and maybe some of you agree to this too, is that it takes your IDE one step back, and that you're only looking at the stuff that's going into code generation. You can't rely on all the analysis because the code is never all there for the IDE to look at.
No,
it's not there for the first time.
Yeah, but still.
But after then, that when you generate actual classes, those are just normal files that you can check. So
also
code completion works.
You need to commit your code generated output. Otherwise, every time you check out your code, you're recompiling, right?
Yes.
You might also be depending on new versions of those compilers, and they might produce different code than you had before, potentially. So you always check your generate code.
And there are also a lot of new feature coming to annotation. I heard they're going to support type. And when you get that, you can add a lot of code injection and dependency injection like you have in the huge framework. It's going to be really interesting.
What was the one I saw recently that was quite interesting? I mean, obviously code generation, looking at that is one thing. Reflectable.
Yep.
Has anyone tried this package yet? I haven't tried it personally. So it's a Google team. So it's a Google internal product. Then it's not a Google official product.
Right.
Released it. It's called Reflectable, and it allows you to do what Dart Mirrors does by using code generation. So it generates the annotations, and then you can use those annotations to determine types at runtime. It's quite interesting, like some of the stuff it does. Well worth checking out if you need that kind of mirrors kind of esque reflection stuff.
Very cool. There's another interesting one here, and actually this one should be pretty quick. Any news on a Flutter visual design tool? Well,
Adobe XD.
Well, you see, here's the thing though. Ta-da. Flutter visual design tools for non-developers. The link is in the chat.
So the question here is, there's also a thing, are you trying to build an app without any programming experience, or are you just trying to design an app, right, without any programming experience? Because designing what you want to have a deeper level of control, but when you can actually currently build an app, there was App Studio. I think it's applications.studio is the website. And that's one of those things where they white label the products, that you can say, I want a shopping cart, I want this, I want that. It puts it together and it builds your app, and they're using Flutter to do that, right? And that is a way of designing and building your app and choosing your colors and your fonts and all the rest of it. But you don't have the in-depth control, right? So there's lots of options out there.
Yeah, I'm also worried when you start using a solution like that, if that's actually part of your code build, is what are you going to do for maintenance? Because everything changes.
Yeah.
Can you add extra items to the result and not have those overwritten by your next change to the design, and then the push generate from that?
I think you can, but you need to have a clear life cycle. You know, like we get very old IDE like Delphi and stuff like this, or OWASP solution, when you're clear on the life cycle, you can get it.
Yep. All right.
Can I mention one tool which was announced on Flutter Africa actually?
Okay.
So another part of the community, Flutter Africa, there was a tools that called FlutterFlow. I think they announced it, and it's an effort from African community, and that tools helps you to build Flutter application effortlessly. So it might be a good tools for designer, for instance, so they can go and experiment with the app on that particular, website.
I think that's really interesting.
I just wanted to say, enter your questions in the live chat, everyone. We're running out of time. We've been running actually over right now where we wanted to be. So enter your questions and we'll get to the last minute questions before we close up. Sorry, Robert, carry on.
I know. It's just really nice to see now the maturation. People are no more working on library. They are working on tool over Flutter, which is great.
So that, yes, that FlutterFlow, I'll bring it up on the screen. The website is flutterflow.io for anyone watching. You'll be able to find the details on that webpage.
They say they got Algolia, which is a huge startup.
So let's see if we got any last minute questions in before we start running up. I think this person missed the announcement. When will Flutter Web is unstable? Are there some guidelines to make us more complicated websites? Flutter Web is now stable. Yay!
Yay!
Flutter 2.0 is now considered stable, and you can go ahead and use that on the stable branch. Are there some guidelines for making some complicated websites? It's the same as building any Flutter app. And so, are there
break up the download?
We mentioned a few tips earlier, so go back and watch the stream because we're going to be repeating it otherwise.
Yeah. Is there ways to overcomplicate a piece of code? Yes.
Right.
Randall does it all the time.
That's right. It's one of my design traits.
Amir. Hashtag HumpDayQandA. I want to do something with a widget like what Mesh Tool does in Adobe Illustrator. How can I do this? I searched a lot, but I couldn't find anything. All right, hold up. I want Robert. This is Robert. This is your question.
I think I know you can do that. I've done it myself. But what I find really interesting, you will gonna find on internet. There's a website right now that converts your SVG to Dart and Flutter canvas using the curves. So you have the complete tool ready right now on the web. So you can do that.
Cool.
Is the mesh tool? Am I thinking the mesh tool is just like that you kind of say it's a surface and you can kind of manipulate it, or am I?
Yeah, it's another version. It's called the Coon. The Coon. I don't remember, but it's called Coon, and it's just crossing vertex. Then that you adjust, but yes, you can do that. Right. It's just a lot of math.
I can say once there is. I mean, I want to do it like that. Go ahead. You have input, you have ways of doing that, but rendering is the other problem, right? So when you're trying to render something that you've warped, you can warp and render stuff warped. There's a canvas function called draw vertices, and draw vertices allows you to supply a shader, a paint object per vertex, per vertices for the color, and allows you to essentially specify a shader with texture coordinates and allows you to texture each triangle in the draw vertices. So you can use that to draw your morphed texture if you want to. It's complicated, I warn you now, and there's not much information about it. So good luck.
I'm posting the link right now.
Great.
So you get the information. What's the name of the implementation? If you can implement that.
Coons patch. Okay, cool. So I think we'll get to a couple more last minute ones. Is Jetpack Android Data API available as a plugin? No, I have no idea. If you want, look, here's the thing, Turth. If you want this, make a plugin, make some platform channels, and go use it. There's nothing literally stopping you at all from doing that. Just straighten you outside your application. You know, in your Flutter activity, create a method channel and just use the API. Wayne in the UK. Hi, is it likely there could be a local-based version of Firebase, i.e. one that can run a private data center as opposed to Google Cloud? Any solution like FB or private DC?
I was just typing an answer for that. Thank you for saving my fingers.
So we've actually been talking about this for a long time, and there's always been talk about it. It's only till recently that we've actually had the Firebase SDKs as open source. Now, what's interesting about this is you could compile the Firebase SDKs yourself and point them to a different server. So you can point them, instead of the Flutter servers, point them Google servers, you can point them at your own. The API they use is called gRPC, and it is implemented in the Google APIs repository on GitHub. And if you go use the gRPC code generator, build the interface on your server code, you can go implement it yourself. As far as I know, no one has done that yet. It's perfectly possible to build your own open source implementation of Cloud Firestore, for example. I'm not sure that would be the right approach. I'm not sure how effective that would be because you're now locked into their API. You could just use gRPC or REST and perform exactly the same things you would be doing with whatever it is like Cloud Firestore or Firebase. But now you can customize it however you want. And that's how apps are done before Firestore and before people using the Firebase things. Continue doing that. There's no problem in doing that. And it's well known, well tested.
Also open source solution that try to do the same, that you can deploy on your own server.
I mean, there's tons of open source alternatives to these things. I mean, none of them, though, I feel are as, should we say, feature because they're not being paid. They're not paid products, right?
Yeah.
I think that there is one. Which
People can't put a lot of time. Oh, go ahead, Rob.
No, I'm thinking about a solution that is a paid solution and you can deploy on your side. And they try to fill the gap because Firebase is so powerful. There's a lot of clients for that.
There's a few. In fact, there's a few now that use GraphQL and a few other different like APIs to surface updates. They offer like cloud storage, database solution, a few other things. I'm not sure. Like, I mean, I was researching these recently. It seems to me like there's nothing like I want Sentry. I kind of like the idea of Sentry, right? Where you have a hosted solution and you can pay them to host it, and then you have a open source solution that you can deploy yourself and manage yourself, and you know. So there's quite a few out there though. Right.
Well, that brings up another interesting point. Like we were saying, free versus paid. People have only got so much time to put into free, which
I mean,
that's
what would you do if you didn't have any libraries? You build it yourself.
And the other thing too, I mean, we're also looking at this situation. We're all here for free in the middle of the workday. We've now been here for 2 hours, 40 minutes. And I can tell you, I'm in the market for a job, but it looks like I might be getting something very soon. If I do, I'm going to be able to be here during lunch, but I won't be able to take a whole afternoon because, you know, we need to eat food.
Some of us. That. Speak for yourself. Some of us are robots.
You know, well, I'll tell you what. I have a dog, and she needs to eat food.
So let's start running up here. Thank you, Robert, and Raf for turning up. You're welcome back anytime, as usual.
Absolutely.
And thank you, Majid, for dropping by. I know you couldn't make the beginning part of the stream, so thank you again. And thank you to our viewers. And again, I'd like to mention, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.
And follow on Twitter.
And follow on Twitter. And
don't forget the bell.
Wait.
And click all the things.
I think you can find Raf easily enough on Twitter. However, Robert does some really interesting stuff, especially the art. So let me grab that real quick.
Not anymore. Art is dead now. I'm doing the
art is dead. No. What happened?
Technology, we're all us.
Yes. I mean, what happened? Did art not pay?
Come on.
We're wrapping up. Yes, we're wrapping up. We're wrapping up. I know. There we go.
See you soon.
Yes.
See you soon. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, bye.